If we could start the meeting, please, Callum. We all up and running? Good, thank you. So good evening, everybody, and welcome to the Woking Borough Council Planning Committee meeting of the 24th of March. We have two items on the agenda tonight, one in Shinfield and one in Sonning, and we have a number of people registered to speak and participate in these meetings as we go along. So before we get underway, if I could just cover a few routine matters. Firstly, as you'll see, we're using Teams video conferencing tonight, and the Planning Committee meeting is live streamed on YouTube. And if I could just quickly run through some of the people present. Planning Committee consists of 11 members of the Borough Council. We have one apology this evening. We're supported tonight by a variety of professional council officers. We have Mary Severin, who is the Borough Solicitor, who's here to give us any legal advice or guidance we may require. Callum Wernham, who is the Democratic Services Officer and Clerk to tonight's committee. Chris Bowring, Councillor Chris Bowring, is the Vice Chairman of the committee. I'm Simon Weeks, I chair the committee. And also tonight we have Conor Corrigan, who is the SDL Delivery Manager. Judy Kelly, who's the Highways Development Manager. And we have the planning officers introducing each of these applications, who are Chris Howard in the first instance and Andrew Chugg for the second item. The 11 borough councillors who serve on the planning committee include representatives from all four political groupings on the council. The committee is quasi-judicial, it's formal with set procedures and conduct, and I'd ask all people to cooperate with that, please. Firstly, the planning officer will present the application, and I will then call in turn those who have pre-registered to speak, and you'll be aware that you have a limited time to get your key points across. Please bear in mind that members are interested in the quality of what you have to say rather than the quantity. So please ensure that you manage your own time to get your key points across, because there's nothing more frustrating for you and us if we have a long preamble and don't get your key points before your time is up. I must emphasise that only those who pre-registered to speak may speak. Everybody else has had an opportunity to comment on the planning applications through the normal consultation process. So following the planning officer's presentation and the comments of the registered speakers, the planning committee will consider, question, seek clarification, and hopefully come to a decision on each application, which may or may not agree with the planning officer's recommendation. Finally, our role tonight as the planning committee is to consider all applications that are valid using prevailing local and national planning policies, or if appropriate, binding decisions of the independent planning committee that may restrict the level of interpretation that we can put on plans. Our role as a planning committee is not to suggest alterations to schemes, whether they are a good idea, whether they are needed, whether they're too costly, whether alternative uses of the land or site, or more suitable sites elsewhere. So thank you for your cooperation on this, and we'll move straight on to the agenda. And so firstly, I know that we have to record the apologies of Councillor Stephen Conway. Is that correct?
That's correct, Chairman.
Thank you very much, and there are no other apologies. Now, do any members have a declaration of interest on either of the items on the agenda that they need to draw to the committee's attention? I see no one indicating. Do you concur, Callum?
Yeah, I see no one indicating, Chairman.
That's okay. And with just two items on the agenda, I don't believe there are either of these items are due to be deferred. So we don't yet have the minutes from the most recent meeting, because this is an extra meeting that's been put in. So that brings us straight on to the first application, which is 210387, which is land south of Cutbush Lane, and it relates to a proposed temporary application for a film studio. So at that stage, I will hand straight over to Chris Howard, who's the planning officer, who will take us through the presentation. Over to you, Chris.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just get this loaded up. And just yell someone if you can see what's on the screen. Is that all coming up your end okay?
That's fine. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Okay, the application is a temporary application for a 5-year planning approval for a film studio to the south of Cutbush Lane. This includes a stage building, 4 workshops, and in addition, further ancillary structures together with landscaping infrastructure to support the site use proposed. The primary use of the site will be for the filming of television and movie formats, and it will include a building containing 2 studio spaces. The workshops will facilitate set production together with storage links to the filming activities. This is the site as shown outlined in red. The main site will be located to the southeast of Cutbush Lane on an existing agricultural field adjacent to phase 1 of the British Museum archive. Workshop T4 will be located on the Science Park campus, shown outlined in red. The land has been prepared as part of the phase 1 delivery of the Science Park for this for the workshop that will be located there. The site would be accessed by the Science Park roundabout and from the Eastern Relief Road, which have both been delivered in full, with the upgraded overbridge on the M4 as part of the housing growth in the area. The access then links on to the upgraded Science Park and Cutbush Lane Link Road, which has been delivered by the works associated by the British Museum. In addition, Cutbush Lane has been upgraded in the section between the museum site and the Link Road. Now, turning to the wider context of the site, this is a perspective of the area. The British Museum archive is located immediately to the northeast of the site. The building is now mostly complete externally and is expected to open in 2022 for bringing the archives out from London to the site. Old House Farm is located to the southeast of the site, and this is grade 2 listed. This is a mixture of commercial uses on the site together with residential in the form of farmhouse. The existing buildings here help screen the site, as does the established tree line and the vegetation which runs along footpath 4 to the south of Old House Farm. Footpath 3 runs along the western boundary of the site and links to the wider footpath network, providing good links to Arborfield, Cindersham and beyond. The applicant has agreed to upgrade the surface and width of this path as a package of measures secured in the Section 106 agreement. To the west is Shimfield Grange, which is owned by the University College Estate Management. The M4 is located to the north of the site, which means the studios will be well served by existing transport infrastructure, such as the new Eastern Relief Road overbridge, as can be seen running across the M4 here. There is residential development at Littlebrook towards the eastern edge of Shimfield, and further houses will be delivered on the land south of Cutbush Lane. In terms of site photos, a pack was sent around to the members that was appended to the reports, and the next couple of slides are of key viewpoints. This slide shows the southern boundary of the proposed studio site, with the arrow broadly pointing to the area of land that would be delivered on. The museum phase 1 building is visible in the background between the trees in the centre of the screen. 2 of the workshops will be located within this hedge, just towards the rear of this hedgerow. You can see where the arrow is pointing to on this parcel of land. Landscaping is being secured beyond the workshop buildings to help screen the developments in the form of semi-mature trees. Footpath 3 is also highlighted, which currently is narrow and the surface is really poor, particularly after a spell of rain. This is a slide of the area adjacent to Cutbush Lane where a stage building will be located together with a further workshop. The workshop has been sited towards Cutbush Lane to provide a degree of screening to the stage building, which is taller. The British Museum building is more evident in the background of this slide. Excuse me. This slide shows the site from the Science Park and the relationship with the British Museum building. The upgraded access link road is shown on the right-hand side, and the Phase 2 Science Park land is also shown for context. In terms of sort of main access into the Science Park, the arrow shows the roundabout that intersects the Eastern Relief Road into the Science Park, together with the housing in the background, which is the development site at Littlebrook. Workshop T4 will be located in the area where the arrow is pointing to on this slide, which is on the existing Science Park campus. And you can see the Rutherford Cancer Treatment Centre towards the left-hand side of the slide. Moving on to sort of the specifics of the scheme itself. In terms of layout, the buildings have been logically arranged on site The location of workshop T1 has been amended to move us further away from Cutbush Lane. It was originally sited more or less directly adjacent to Cutbush Lane, but the applicant has made amendments on officer's advice in regards to this. There will be 181 parking spaces, which is considered sufficient for the end use of the site, together with further cycle and motorcycle parking, which is also included. Landscaping is proposed both on-site and off-site, and the application is supported by the landscape officer in terms of the visual impacts of the buildings and the wider area, retained landscape features, and the planting of the new trees and hedgerows. In terms of access, construction access would be accessed by Old House Farm, which will be controlled by traffic management. The temporary nature of the buildings means these can be fabricated off-site, so it'll be a very short-term project to deliver the buildings, expected to be completed by September of this year. For operational access, the scheme has been amended to include access from Cutbush Lane, which is shown on this slide here. The Highways Office supports the construction and permanent access solution subject to the mitigation measures in terms of traffic management initially. Turning to the elevations now, here is the front and side elevation of a stage building. The lower third of the building will be precast concrete and the upper area will be clad in dark grey metal, which has been informed by the materials used by the British Museum building. The height of the building is around just shy of 18 metres at a ridge, and it has a quasi-agricultural appearance achieved by the inclusion of a pitch roof. For the workshops, these are just over 10 metres in height. These are constructed of foam panels and clad in dark grey metal to have a degree of continuity for the appearance of the materials. Again, these broadly have the appearance of agricultural buildings. This slide shows a perspective shot of the main studio site. As advised, workshop T1 would help break up the massing of a stage building from Cutbush Lane, as would the two workshops to the rear of the site. Parking is well distributed throughout the site as well. Into a landscape slide. This slide shows the a landscape shot taken from where footpath 3 splits from footpath 4. It's quite a key visual point here. What you may be able to make out where the arrow is pointing, you can see the pitch roofs of the stage building just creeping above the backdrop of the buildings at Old House Farm. So whilst it is a tall building, the existing built form and screening along the footpaths does help provide a good degree of they sort of minimise the impact of the built form. Moving on to looking at the sort of benefits and adverse impacts of the scheme. It basically, as outlined in the report, the proposed facilities within the countryside where the use may not be acceptable with regards to policy CP11. It is, however, the case that the policy should not just be read in isolation, and the development plan as a whole should be taken into account. There are significant benefits that will be secured as a result of the delivery of the studio space, which includes significant employment for both the construction phase and the delivery of the studios. Around 600 jobs will be generated by the use of the studio space directly, and that's together with a further 326 indirect jobs. The local enterprise partnership, together with the government's Department for Media and the British Film Commission, support the application. The application could generate a gross added value figure of around £36 million per annum. In addition, the applicant has made a commitment with regards to local employment apprenticeships for agreeing to support local job roles within the Section 106 agreement. In addition, the nature of the use of the site, it's likely that there will be a draw on local tradespepeople for the workshop activities in regards to preparing sets, etc. The location of the site is also sustainable, and there's been a significant infrastructure upgrade secured by the housing growth and employment space delivered to date. And so this site can effectively be seen as a service parcels, given that the roads are already in to serve it. In terms of footpath enhancements, these have been secured as advised, and the surfacing and width of footpath 3 will be enhanced to deliver a more suitable sort of surface for users of the area. The application secures a 10% biodiversity net gain, which is commendable given that there's no national minimum requirement at present. And landscaping has been secured off-site to help screen the facility, which includes semi-mature trees. For the stage building, the applicant has also taken sustainability into account and added 200 metre squares of solar panels, which is secured by condition set 26, which will deliver 10% renewable energy for the site. This is in addition to a fabric first approach for the buildings, and because these are so well insulated, there is no need for them to be heated. The application also makes a commitment to a community outreach with regards to local schools and work experience, together with engagement with the parish council, which will be secured by condition 25. Engagement, as I understand, has already been undertaken with the Bullmarsh School. In terms of potential adverse impacts, clearly there'll be a loss of countryside, and whilst that is acknowledged, the land is not particularly distinctive in its landscape form. It's quite a flat plateau of fields, so there's no sort of distinguishing features that we may seek to retain, such as trees, etc. For the loss of the agricultural land, the soil is classed as 3A and 3B. And whilst there will be a loss of the soil, this soil is not of the highest quality. In terms of impact on trees and landscape, the amendment sought in regards to the access has retained the trees fronting the site. Further landscaping is secured, and the photo montages for the landscape and visual assessment demonstrate that the wider impacts are not significant on the landscape backdrop. For construction, again, can cause destruction, but this will be temporary and managed by the construction environmental management plan. The build phase is, as advised, rapid through the method of construction, so this will limit the impact to the surrounding residents, and also the site is very isolated in terms of residential properties. With regards to highways, significant improvements have been secured to the wider area. Comparisons with other studios with regards to trip generation, such as Pinewood, show the use of the studio has a less of an impact of a office building due to the nature of the activities and the trip generation being dispersed more throughout the day. In all scenarios, when the transport assessment has been used, compare against other studios, the worst case scenarios have been used. For the listed building at Old House Farm, Cutbush Manor, the Heritage Office supports the application with regards to the impact on these, together with the non-designated Shimfield Grange site. Moving on to neighbours, the location of site means that there will be no significant impacts with regards to overbearing, loss of light or overlooking. The level of separation to the nearest residential dwelling is 100 metres to Old House Farm, 200 metres to the dwelling of the east of the cluster of properties located towards Cutbush Manor, and over 350 metres to Upward Bungalow. Noise associated with the operation of the studios will be limited, as many of the activities will be within the buildings, and these will incorporate sound insulation, which will be controlled by condition 21 and 22. The environmental health officer has assessed the noise report and supports the approach. Finally, for policy TB13, this relates to the science park use. Whilst it is acknowledged that one of the workshops will be in a science park land, this is only a temporary building, and its use will be controlled, and therefore the long-term objective of this policy is not considered to be undermined. So in conclusion, the social, economic and environmental benefits of the proposal are considered to outweigh the harm of the countryside. No significant impacts are envisaged in regards to neighbour amenities, highways, landscape and biodiversity, and we have secured a good package of mitigation measures for the Section 106 agreement, together with the conditions. And in terms of the recommendation, it's a three-tiered recommendation. It's approved subject to the Section 106 agreement and the conditions set out in and amended in the members' update. And should the Section 106 agreement not be signed by the applicant by 3 months of the date of the committee resolution, we should delegate the application to Head of Development Management to refuse the application. Just moving on to the members' update, there's a few points to pick up in there, mostly clarifications. On page 5, the area of the buildings was misquoted. It should be 14,080 square metres and not 14,800 square metres. And then on page 6 and 16, there is a amendment to recommendation A and C to this text that is stated below. And in addition, we've shortened the time frame for recommendation C on page 16 for the completion of a legal agreement from 6 months to 3 months. But I understand this may be completed by tomorrow. On page 17, there's a list of plans that are to be inserted, which have been included. There are about 2 or 3 further just amendments to these, just in terms of revision numbers, which haven't been stated here, but we will do that as tidying up tomorrow, just to be aware. Nothing significant in terms of the changes to the drawings, just getting that list all in order. Goes on for a little while. Page 9 and 14, amendments to conditions and additional conditions as have been set out there. And then just a few corrections and clarifications on page 20, summary information, correction of cycle spaces from 20, which should be 30. Clarification, page 21 of the reports, the ecology officer raises no objections to the application and the offsite biodiversity enhancements that have been secured. On page 27, the second sentence, the date should read 2017, not 2007 as stated. And on page 35, paragraph 51, correction in terms of it should be 200 metres square of solar panels rather than 200 solar panels as stated. On page 36, paragraph 61, first third sentence, there are 10 blue badge spaces to be provided, not 9 as stated. On page 40, paragraph 82, the first sentence, it's just an update in terms of the solar panels, the one that I just went through just a second ago. We did a second round of consultation in terms of amended plans. We had a full letter of support from Arborfield and Newland Parish Council. We had 2 letters of support from the Department of Digital, Culture, Media and Sport, outlining the economic gains of the media sector. And then in terms of neighbours, we had 4 further letters of support, 1 further letter of objection. In terms of letter of objection, it's mostly been addressed within the report. It was with regards to the separation distance to Upward Bungalow, which is over 350 metres. So just a bit of text there to clarify that. And on page 22, we received a letter of objection from the owners of Shinfield Grange and comment just to state that they supported the principle of development, but they had some objections in terms of the detailed design, and I've gone through those in the members' update, so I won't repeat on those here. And that's it. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, perhaps we can lose your slides, please, Chris. Yep, thank you very much. Okay, members, so you will have obviously noted there are quite a few minor amendments detailed in the members' update, but I don't think any of those are major issues. It's tidying up the application, which is obviously been coming through at a fairly quick rate. I will now move on to those people who are registered to speak. And firstly, if I could invite Nick Smith, the applicant, on behalf of Shinfield Studios, and Nick Patterson-Neild, who is their planning consultant. I hope you can share your 3 minutes and get your key points across. So straight across to you, please. Good evening.
Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for taking the time to hear our application. I just wanted to say a few words about the industry and the scheme. And I'd like to start by saying that despite the current economic downturn, that the film and television production industry is booming at the moment. And the UK is at the forefront of this, but the lack of studio space is holding back any growth. So there is a real and significant opportunity with this first phase of our application to put Shinfield and Wokingham and Berkshire on the global film studio map. The inward investment of millions of pounds, the local job creation and the local economic benefits are significant and will have a lasting long-term benefit into the future. Content production, which is the area that this application will address, is the fastest growing industry in the UK today. It delivered over £3.6 billion of inward investment in 2019, the last full year on record. And even in 2020, despite COVID, Q4 generated £1.2 billion of inward investment, which is the second highest ever 3-month spend on record. However, as I said, there's an acute shortage of studio space to meet the demands of companies like Disney, Netflix, Amazon and Apple. And the government itself is targeting a 6 billion figure by 2025. That represents a 65% growth over the next 4 years. It's estimated to achieve this, we need about 1.8 million square feet of new studio space across the UK. And regions of the country that are fortunate enough to deliver on this demand will help to drive the UK's post-COVID economic recovery, whilst providing UK PLC with billions of pounds of investment and supporting many hundreds of local jobs. A typical production will spend 80 to 100 million pounds over a 9 to 12 month period, and up to 10 million pounds in any month. And a significant proportion of this will be spent locally. A typical production will also employ upwards of 500 crew, creating a number of local, highly paid job opportunities. So the industry will bring substantial growth and new business opportunities to Berkshire. And I hope to be able to bring these opportunities and benefits to Wokingham and Shinfield. And I'd just like to thank Shinfield Parish Council for its support with our application. And I'd like to thank members of the public who have written and supported this application. So thank you for your time.
Okay, thank you. Nick Patterson-Neild, please.
Thank you. Just to add to that in brief, national policy supports the creative sector, which can play an important role in supporting collaboration, innovation, productivity and sustainability, as well as in driving the economic prospects of the local area, and expressly supports additional studio capacity. This is the first step towards developing the university's Sydney Valley proposal and benefits, as you've heard from government, Thames Valley LEP and British Film Commission support. In conclusion, the studios and workshops will develop collaboration between creative content providers and the wider business and specialist education networks, both on and off the studio lot, attracting significant inward investment to the local area, and also will enable close working relationship with the University School of Film, Theatre and Television. We hope that members will support this first stage in the creative industries cluster at Thames Valley Science Park. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. It's a great shame you can't bring Hollywood weather with it as well, but never mind. Okay. If I can now come on to the two ward members who registered to speak, and come first to Jim Fruin and then Charlotte Haytham-Taylor. Jim, over to you.
Thank you. I'm broadly in favour of this proposal and fully understand the need for speed, but we have an obligation to ensure all planning is applied equally to all applicants. Given the speed, can officers kindly confirm that all due process has been applied? We also have further requests for clarification. The planning statement states it is clear, therefore, that the development proposal will not have a severe impact on local network. Can officers show what analysis has been done to confirm this statement, particularly for the M4 Junction 11 Black Boy roundabout on Low Early Way? In response to travel comments, make direct comparison to travel impacts from Shepperton, showing significant morning and evening peak traffic patterns. The planning statement, however, indicates, and has been said tonight, a more even distribution through the day, resulting in less pronounced traffic peak. This appears to be a contradiction. What modelling and analysis have officers done to confirm either of these statements? Construction. This development is on top of a number of other in-progress developments in the same community. What, if any, measurement and analysis of the cumulative community impact has been undertaken? The application states it will not impact on the local sewerage system, which has regularly failed residents in recent months. Again, just confirmation that that is so would be good. And finally, flooding. This site is in close proximity to Zone 3. Analysis is based on 100-year occurrences. Can officers confirm how many 100-year occurrences have been experienced in the last 5 years as this area regularly floods? Thank you. Over to you, Charlotte.
Thank you very much, and I'll be focusing on further aspects of this application. I'm disappointed that the temporary studios are proposed mainly on open countryside, contrary to policy CP11 in the core strategy, when other land within the science park has not been utilised first. Therefore, it is especially necessary that the S106 agreement is secured in a timely fashion to secure measures to mitigate against this proposal, and to agree a plan to dismantle the site should the permanent permission not be granted at year 5. Indeed, I'd go further to ask that in these exceptional circumstances, if the committee are minded to approve this application, that the chair of the planning committee should also have full oversight of the S106 agreement. The planning committee may also want to look further into conditions regarding the section 17 of your papers this evening on landscape and planting. The studios will be 18 metres high, and the workshops are vast in scale and will dominate the open countryside and neighbouring college at Shinfield Grange, contrary to policies CP3, CCO3 and TB21. There must be further conditions to plant further mature trees in order to protect the visual amenity, and also in a timely fashion. Jim has also mentioned very clearly having more defined conditions around waste. Currently, I do not believe that the current sewage system in the area has the capacity for development of this scale. Lastly, though, I must say that I am in balance in favour of this application, as in time, this use will generate economic prosperity and further opportunities for many local residents in this area. There will be hundreds of new jobs created, spanning from accountancy, animation and hospitality, right the way through to carpentry, law and logistics. And tomorrow night I'll be speaking very much on the art and culture strategy, so fully supportive.
Okay, thank you very much. So that concludes those people who registered to speak. And before I throw this open to members, I think it would just be useful to get clarification on a couple of points that will probably be points otherwise that each member will raise in turn. So Chris, if you could perhaps take each of these in turn. Is Old House Farm residential?
There is still residential element to it at the farmhouse itself. That part of it is to my understanding.
Okay, and that's 100 metres away from the site.
That's 100 metres away from the site, yeah.
Okay. Next point was related to the Eastern Relief Road and the other road there. Obviously, when the science park was approved a couple of years ago, it was proposed that there would be at peak 5,000 people employed by the science park. So is this the reason, that one of the principal reasons that it's believed that the impact on traffic will be can be coped with, considering the road network has been upgraded for a larger scale project already?
Yes, it has, and what we've done in order to ensure that is continuous and further phases of Science Park don't come forward unless there's further modelling work to be done. We've secured that in the Section 106 agreement, so the modelling does give us a lot of headroom in terms of sort of the trips generation from this this aspect of the proposal. So, but we have secured that no further reserve matters applications can come forward for the Science Park until they have come back and done some more modelling work.
All right, and I noticed the comments from Jim Fruin about the impact on the local road network during peak periods. I understand that because of the cost of operating these studios, that they tend to have much longer days than conventional working environment and may well be starting earlier and finishing later. Is that one of the reasons why you think that the impact on local traffic will be minimised, because it doesn't directly clash with peak hour traffic?
I think so. It's not a 9 till 5 type setup as an office use will be, which clashes with school traffic and creates a perfect storm when we're back out in the real world. So I think that's probably the case. Julie's probably best versed to do the transport ones. I'm quite happy to do others on the flooding issues, and yeah.
All right. And the last point, I think, was Judy, did you just want to comment on that, on the traffic issue? Please?
Yeah, so they've done a daily profile from 7 in the morning until 7 in the evening based on Shepperton Studios. It shows that in the morning, the peak is definitely before the normal network morning peak. And then in the afternoon, the highest traffic movements tend to be after 6 o'clock. So as Chris said, it's really not combining with the normal trips to school and to work and so on, which is beneficial. And as he mentioned, the local infrastructure, the Eastern Relief Road, the Black Boy Gyratory, they've been fully designed to accommodate the consented trip rates from the Thames Valley Science Park, which I believe is something like 950 peak hour movements So this site is generating something about 70 peak hour movements, so clearly a fraction of what the network can accommodate.
Okay, thank you for that. And just last point for Chris, the montages you showed us showed the core buildings, the 18-metre high buildings, as pretty well black in colour, and it showed the periphery buildings in front and behind it as a very pale colour. Councillor Haytham-Taylor mentioned the impact on the countryside because these are large buildings. Were these just mock-ups, or can you explain why you've chosen to have, or why there appear to be proposed to be contrasting colours for the two principal or the major buildings there?
I think the one, the image I showed, I believe is one of the footpath, was it? Are you talking about here? Just to be clear.
Yes,
yeah.
Correct.
Yeah, that's correct. That was part of the landscape and visual assessment, and what they've done there is shown the building in quite a stark colour to let it stand out on the picture itself. The cladding we've got for that element of the stage will be dark brown, to grey, sorry, which is similar in colour as the British Museum. So we can't deny that you'll be able to see it, but the impact of it is, I think, with all the screening that's present there with Old House Farm and the landscape features along that footpath, you'll get glimpses to it. But yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Throw it open to members now for their comments. I see Andrew as the first person indicating to speak. Andrew, over to you.
Yes, thank you, Chair, and thank you, Christopher, for your presentation, and to everyone who has spoken already about this application. I do place great store on the support for this application from the Shinfield and the Aberfield and Newland Parish Councils, and the supportive comments from some local residents. I note that much of this support derives from the very significant local employment creation. I also note that the officer assurances regarding impacts on a wide range of important matters. Notwithstanding, I do note the questions and concerns identified tonight by Charlotte and Jim, two local members. I am also concerned at the further loss of land designated by WBC as countryside, and I wonder if the application was to build houses on the site, whether the outcome of the planning application might be very different. I do have a number of questions that relate to matters that might help to soften some of the potentially less positive impacts of the proposal. And I'd like to break these questions down into perhaps 2 or 3 groupings. So to begin with, parking. What are the parking standards for this type of facility? On page 20, it's stated that there'll be 600 direct jobs, not necessarily, I assume, all on site, but only 181 parking spaces. Additionally, I don't see any references to the number of electric vehicle charging points, but I may have overlooked that. And on page 14, I'm wondering whether the informative 3 might be strengthened to ensure that parking during the construction and after occupation will need to be provided on site. All parking would need to be provided on site and not permitted on any of the main roads or on turning heads. So if I could perhaps deal with those 2 questions first, please.
Okay, I think we'll ask Judy perhaps to address those first, please, Judy.
Yes, there's a couple of things there. So I think that although there will be around 600 sort of new jobs, not all of those 600 people will be on site at the same time. There aren't any specific parking standards for film studios because it's quite a unique use class. So what they've done is really the next best thing. They've looked at Shepperton Studios, Pinewood Studios, and the studios over at Arborfield as well. They've looked at the floor space of those compared with the parking. They've also done a parking accumulation exercise. So that looks at the arrivals and departures throughout the day for each hour, how many parking spaces are being used, what the capacity is, and so on. And they've really used the most conservative of all those surveys that are available. So I think their parking accumulation shows that they kind of get up to about 175 parking spaces being needed on site in the worst kind of peak, and obviously they're providing 181, so they've got a little bit of a buffer. Aside from that, I think they are quite well connected to the wider area in terms of, they've got a greenway running right in front of the site. They've got a 30-minute bus service from Thames Valley Science Park. There's quite a lot of built up area within walking, cycling distance, and obviously you've got early railway station and other railway stations that are sort of within sort of cycling distance. So I think in combination that they were quite happy with the parking proposed for this site.
Okay, and can I just clarify that this modelling, which is based on Shepperton, we are comparing sort of like with like as far as that is possible?
Absolutely. So it's
fine.
The parking ratio per square metre. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay. Thank you very much. Next two questions, if I may. I welcome the inclusion of some 10% renewables in the fabric of the building, but I do worry about the impact of more vehicle movements on total CO2 emissions, and therefore on the borough's climate emergency action plan. Have those impacts been modelled at all? And secondly, I acknowledge the officer's conclusions regarding traffic. However, could you please clarify just how far the modelling extended geographically? And specifically, are there any forecasts on the likely increase in traffic along the already often congested lower Early Way?
Okay, Judy.
Yeah, so as we mentioned, there is a trip distribution that's in the transport assessment, which pretty much goes as far as the Black Boy roundabout, the M4 junction 11. It's looked at the kind of distribution of the traffic that would be generated here on all of those junctions, including down to sort of Arborfield Road, Hyde End Road, and so on. But I think the key thing to bear in mind here is that the university have agreed not to bring forward the much larger Science Park site with the 950 trips in the peak hours. And the trips that are being generated by this site are something around 60 to 70 in the peak hours. So really, this site is not putting any additional traffic onto the network compared with what's being consented for the Thames Valley Science Park that is yet to come, and they're restraining the sort of bringing forward of that site until they can get the strategic transport modelling exercise done.
And any modelling of the impact of more vehicle movements on CO2 emissions?
I think that might be one for Chris. Might be able to help me out here. Is that maybe something environmental health might have looked at?
I think it's. Sorry, to turn my camera on. Basically, the level of trip generation generated for these studios will be much less than what has been already consented for the Science Park. So there will be a net reduction in carbon over and above what we've approved already on the Science Park site. So if things change on the Science Park in terms of if the studio space is brought forward there, then again there'll be further less trip generations.
Okay, thanks for that. And two final questions, if I might. I do know the existing Science Park buildings, and I find it's a very attractive site. But I do have concerns over the positioning of the fourth workshop within the Science Park. Now, it was said tonight that that is intended, I think, to be a temporary measure. But my concern is with the impact on visual amenity of that site. As I said, the current layout is quite open and attractive. In addition, has any consideration been given to the amount of additional parking that might be required for that workshop on the Science Park? And from what I could gather from the drawings, there doesn't seem to be any loss of existing car park spaces where the fourth workshop will be located. But could that just be confirmed? And then the final question is, we've been told again tonight that the application is for temporary use, and that after 5 years, the intention would be for the land to be restored to its current use. But there is reference in the comments from the College of Estates Management in their submission to some of the stages being designed, they state, with a 25-year lifespan. What justification have the applicants given for this application for temporary use rather than for permanent use, which it may in fact become? I'm just intrigued, as to why the application is for temporary rather than a permanent facility. Thank you.
Okay, Chris, are you going to take that, or Julie,
Yeah.
do you want to cover the parking issue first?
I can do both if you like. Or in terms of parking on the Science Park campus, there's an existing car park there which has got significant over provision for the site at present. So there's parking for that workshop space there. In terms of the visual impact on the Science Park itself, yes, I note your concerns on that, but it is a temporary structure and we have to see it in that context. And so that should be able to be constructed on site because the land has already been laid flat there as part of the other phase works. It should be able to be erected on that site and taken off site very easily. The lifespan of the buildings, they are the stage building is by its nature, it has to be a bit more of a substantial building. What we have got though is condition free, which requires all buildings to be removed at the end of the 5-year period, unless another application comes forward for their retention. So that may, we have to consider this application as it is before it's on its own merits, and that will be applicant that's sorted this stage. But they may come back again to extend the time frame for that.
Okay, thank you, Chris and Judy, for your answers to that.
Could I just add, sorry, Chair, there was a question earlier about electric vehicle spaces. There'll be 19 in total.
It is there. There's no standard for that yet, is there?
We do have a draft standard, yeah, and there's 19 being proposed for this application, just to confirm.
And that draft standard has some bearing, does it, before it's ratified?
It does have some. Our policy team have said it has got some standing at the moment. It's not been through a public consultation exercise, but it's been through an internal consultation exercise, and it's published on the website.
Thank you. Now let's hear from some other members who've got questions. Callum, who else have we got indicating to speak, please?
Just bringing the list up, Chairman. There's quite a few. So first off, we have Rochelle, then Abdul.
Okay, fine. Rochelle next, and as Callum says next, we'll go to Abdul Lewis. Rochelle?
Okay, I've got a couple of questions. Not quite as many as the previous person. I want to know about apprenticeships. Are there going to be any, and if so, how many? I also would like to know, how is the heating being done? Is it being done by heat pumps? Is it being done by gas? And since gas does provide so much CO2, we'd rather that it didn't. I'd also like to encourage them, if possible, to increase the number of PV panels, because they will be using an awful lot of electricity, and consider going up to about 25% would be very good for the environment. Lastly, you spoke something about another application in 5 years. I like the idea of having 600 jobs here, and possibly even more. And if they leave in 5 years, they would lose 600 jobs, which is not a good thing in this area. So some comments on those things, please.
Okay. Chris?
Okay, in terms of apprenticeships, I don't know the specifics in terms of the numbers, but there is a requirement in the Section 106 agreement, as outlined in the presentation, for them to provide either contribute to our skills plan at Wokingham, or they do that directly themselves. So the option is open for them on that. But as I said, I think there is also a big opportunity for sort of skilled trades as well for the site. So they should have a good draw on that by the nature of the work on the site. In terms of heating, there's no requirement to heat the workshops or the stage building. The method of construction means that these buildings don't need to be individually heated. So that's a bonus in terms of sort of CO2 emissions. And the amount of PV panels, yes, it would be great to get some more, but the size of the size of the stage building governs the amount of PV panels that you can get up on it. So it's the practicalities of that.
Okay, I'd like to see heating though, because we'd like to see more climate change positive changes, including such things as reducing heat pumps, using heat pumps to reduce use of carbon-based problems, and also, we'd like to keep the jobs here. We really need extra jobs in this area, and to have local jobs, which people mean they don't have to commute long distances to get here, would be a very good thing for the local area. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think that's something we'd all subscribe to, Rochelle. If I now come on to Councillor Abdul Loys. Abdul, are you there?
Yes. Thank you, Chair, and good evening, everyone.
Good evening.
I think my few questions already been answered. However, I would like to officers to comment on two things. And the comparison you've done with the Shepperton studios, given the location of the residents surrounding the area, is very, very little. So that comparison might not fit with Shinfield and our infrastructure with the highway here in Workingham. That bit of my concern. Right. Secondly, about the noise, you mentioned about 22, the things you measure. The studio's noise are very massive. It's almost like, you hear the bomb blast, something like this in a film studios. So I wonder if you could elaborate a bit more about the noise, how you come to this level of the noise that is acceptance to our neighbours, because I have a bit of concern about that. That's one impact on the noise to comment on, please. And the other ones, it's been answered about the car park. That's all done. Okay. Yes. Okay. Thank you. These two will be done. Thank you, sir.
Okay. So, Chris, could you answer in reverse order then? Firstly, the issues about noise in terms of how well insulated the buildings are in terms of preventing excessive noise travelling over what is generally a very flat landscape.
Indeed, the application has the conditions attached to it, 21 and 22 in regards to that. Now, the noise that you're going to hear on your TV or whatever, that comes through quite loudly at times, and that is looped onto the edited into the set into the what's I'm trying to say. It's basically most of the noises aren't made on site.
What you're saying is there's not going to be any explosions on site. They'll be added afterwards, so to speak.
That's much better than how I put it. Thank you, Simon. And also in Arborfield, we haven't had any complaints about the use of the studios over there. They serve a similar function. So it's all contained within the buildings, and these things are added in.
Okay. There's also the point that Councillor Loy's made about whether the comparison between what's proposed at Shinfield and Shepperton was a realistic comparison.
I'm happy to take that if you like.
Please.
Yeah,
please.
so I think Shepperton is a little bit more remote in terms of it doesn't have as much built up sort of area around it, but in a way, because we've used the trip rates for Shepperton as the worst case scenario, we're probably overestimating the impact of this site, which is more sort of sustainably located and accessible to bus services and sort of built up area. So yeah, the two sites aren't obviously directly comparison in terms of the geographical locations and what's going on around them, but it's actually in favour of this site, and we've been very robust and conservative in that comparison.
Okay, thank you. Right, could I just ask Councillor Rochelle Shepherd-Debay to turn her camera off, please? And who else do we have, please? Callum?
I'm here, Simon.
Let me just go through the list. We have, after Abdul, we go to Chris, Pauline, then Malcolm.
Okay, Chris Bowring next, please, then Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this planning application is going to be determined on the big picture. There's a big for and there's a big against. The for is this is a very valuable enterprise, which is to benefit locally and also nationally, and it's got a lot of backers, and that's a good thing. on the other side, the fact this is a development in the countryside, which is completely against policy. And worse than that, there is an 18-metre building. So, which is, we will create very poor amenity for people in the countryside looking across at the structure. So those are the two things to balance. I don't think it's anything to do with parking or traffic. I think those are perfectly sound. It is actually a quite small application in terms of traffic, as we've been told. There's no problem with climate change because there are heat pumps. It's written in the agenda. I did have a question about workshop 4, if that's the right number. Workshop 4 over in the science park. Are we actually determining that? Because I thought that had planning permission.
Clarification, please.
Workshop 4 is that is part of the science park. It does have outline planning consent, but not for a film as a film studio or workshop. So it's for a science and innovation park. So we are determining that, just to be clear.
Okay. I don't know if Andrew referred to the if housing was proposed on here. I'm quite sure if housing were proposed on here, it would be instantly refused because it's in the countryside. So it's quite different. So there are strong arguments in favour of this, but there are arguments against too. This is not strictly relevant, but I was just wondering, with the stage being 18 metres high, was any consideration given to excavating land so that the whole thing could be dropped down a little? I know we have to determine the application in front of us, but I was curious why that couldn't be done.
I was just wondering whether it would be useful, Chris. I appreciate they're not directly related to this, but do we have an idea of the height of the existing science park building and the existing British Museum building? I recall the British Museum building, I believe, is fairly low profile, but the science park building is a pretty substantial building in its own right. I was just wondering whether we can compare the heights of the respective buildings.
Yeah, indeed, we can. The height of the Science Park Gateway building was 15 metres, so it's pretty similar to what is in front of us. I think the stage building, I think, is about 17.5 metres. I rounded up to 18. And the British Museum building was about 12 metres in height. Okay. But they both have a different form of use in terms of, the archive building. You can't stack up archives too high because of the very nature of where they're used. And in terms of lowering the stage building into the site, you would sort of compromise issues such as getting access into the site, and it also could impact in terms of drainage as well. So
I might add that if we were looking at a permanent proposal, I think the point Chris made had some validity, but we are looking at a maximum 5-year proposal, and the comparative costs associated with setting a building into the ground for a limited period as opposed to setting a building into the ground of it for a permanent building would be very different.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, indeed it would.
Okay, so just to summarise then, I mean, at the moment I'm minded to approve because I think there are considerable advantages, but I do think members need to take into account the fact this is, if you like, a pretty blatant proposed development in the countryside and a very tall one. Thank you.
I think in all fairness, Chris, Chris in his presentation and the report does fully acknowledge that this is not the sort of building or not the sort of height scale of building that we would normally be permitting. Yeah. I think the trouble is it's got to be balanced against, as you say, the benefits. And
yeah, I'm just underlining it and trying to influence my fellow members of the committee.
All of planning is about balance, isn't it?
Indeed, it is. Indeed. Right. Thank you very much.
Okay. All right, if we could now come on to Pauline Jorgensen.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm largely in favour of this application, but I'm also a bit perplexed by the 5-year nature of it, because I can't see how you could possibly return this land to its original state at the end of 5 years. And I'd like to ask the officers, is there any form of bond or anything that means that money is set aside to return this land to its original state? Because otherwise, what seems to me is that you've got a sort of promise, and at the end of it, you're going to get either you give us an extension or we can't return the land to its original state. And if it is just going to be extended indefinitely, would the planning officers have come to a different conclusion about what their requirements were on the site, which I think I've just heard the answer is yes, because some of the things that they're allowing would only be allowed because it's a temporary building. So as I say, I'm largely in favour of this, but I'm a bit concerned about the 5-year nature and how we protect ourselves from either just being told that it can't be returned to normal or anything like that at the end.
Okay, Chris, would you like to try and address that?
Yeah, excuse me. In terms of the removal, it's governed by condition 3, and we can enforce against that condition if they were to hang around and stay on. It's quite clear in that condition. We've asked for a remediation submission, I think, at the end of the 4-year period, and the land to be restored within 5 years of the date of the planning permission. So what they want to do next, we will have to wait and see. So at this stage, as I said, we can only consider this application on its own merits. And if they come in for something else, we'll have to consider that later on down the line.
Yes, I understand that, Chris. I'm just a bit concerned that there's going to be some compromising at the end if they do have to return it, and exactly how you're going to return something that's got quite a lot of tarmac on it into an agricultural field again.
Pauline, just to jump in, sorry, the condition is pretty standard on schemes where we want the site restored back to its former use. So there is, the council can take action against that to bring it back into its use. It happens up and down the country where there's a temporary use. I suppose the easiest one to look at is something like removal of material from the ground. That's restored, and it's a condition normally to do that. So it's not something I'd be worried about in terms of having a bond in place to do it. We have sufficient powers to be able to do that, to get them to bring it back to the state, and by doing that, the cost is on them. There's no obligation on us to do anything.
So just let me follow that a bit further, Connor. If the company gets taken over or goes into liquidation or something like that in order to avoid its obligation at the end, where do we stand then?
Reading University are tied into it, so I don't think they're going to go into liquidation. Okay,
Reading University would be obliged to reinstate.
It's their land, yes. So it falls with the landowner.
Actually, thank you, Coroner. That's great.
Does that reassure you, Pauline?
Absolutely does.
All right, thank you. Can now come on to Malcolm Richards.
Yes, thank you, Simon. I had lots of questions when I first heard this, but over half of them have been dealt with by previous answers, so that's okay. But I've still got a few questions. When the studio is alive, the temporary one, we've already agreed studios have longer working hours. That isn't a problem for me, and I don't think there's likely to be noise and light and so on, because it's probably internal stuff. But on the construction side, I've noticed there are longer working hours. Normally these things are about from 8 till 5 or 8 till 6. And then Saturday morning, I notice here that they're going to be from 6:30 in the morning till 18:30 in the evening, and then till 3 o'clock on the Saturday afternoon. So they're longer hours. Now, I don't know whether that will be a problem if you're constructing something and you're starting at about 6 o'clock in the morning. Whether there's been any consultation with the local people, with the residents, to see if that might be an issue or whatever. But part of that also is that if you're starting building and working at 6 or 6:30 in the morning, what about deliveries that would come in the night? Because they need them to arrive. I have memories of a large local supermarket over a few years ago that had big storage warehouses and things, and they had deliveries over the night. So at 3 o'clock in the morning, big lorries would arrive and big steel doors were opening. Can you reassure me that during the construction we will not have big noisy metal doors opening and big noisy lorries in the middle? It does say in the folder that it will be a SEMP, a management plan. Will that cover these aspects of middle of the night deliveries and early morning starts? That's one question.
All right, let's address that first.
Okay.
Perhaps that I think we heard from part of the original presentation that, with the exception of the old house farm, the nearest residential is over 200 metres away. I believe that's correct, Chris?
Yes, that's correct. Yeah.
And we also heard that these buildings are modular, and are assembled off-site. So am I correct in assuming that's the reason, the fact that the nearest dwellings are a considerable distance away, and that the construction period is going to be comparatively brief compared with a conventional construction site? Is that the reason why you've allowed more generous construction hours?
Yes, indeed. And we also, on these sites, it is very isolated, as you say. And also we have to be mindful as well that the ministerial guidance is to sort of increase working hours due to COVID impacts as well at present. But we haven't taken that into account fully on this application. We've just extended the hours a little bit over and above what we would normally permit. It's 7:30 till 6:30 Monday to Friday, and it is 8 o'clock till 3 o'clock on Saturdays. No Saturdays, Sundays or bank holiday working.
That's fine. That's reassuring. Good.
And the main thing as well, sorry, Malcolm, is the traffic won't pass any properties because it comes in from the science park down to the site by that link road I showed you earlier on. So it completely bypasses any main residential properties that are along Cutbush Lane itself.
Good. Okay, that's that. The second aspect is the height of the buildings, which I think are 18 metres. It's above the 18 metres that all these problems have with cladding or whatever. So it's obviously a fairly tall building, and the colours I saw in the book were dark colours, like blacks and dark greys. I think you mentioned earlier on in the presentation that they'd been looking, that was just for the sake of the book, but you were looking at dark grey or dark brown or something. Did I understand that correctly? I would have thought if it's in a greenery area in a countryside, wouldn't a mix of greens and brown be better than dark grey on a tall building? Is that something that could be looked at?
The materials have been agreed, and it's similar to, in terms of the context of that British Museum building I showed you earlier, and that sits in the landscape pretty well, I think. I think if you try and sort of camouflage it, so to speak, with greens in there, you may draw more attention to it. So I think we've tried to balance those colours in terms of the context and how that other building is sort of fitted in with the landscape of the British Museum.
Okay, so it's to match a nearby building as well. Okay, the other thing is trees. I think I read in there that you're not cutting down lots of trees or anything. You're going to deal with the greenery and the screening as best you can. Does it involve actually cutting down any trees or hedgerows or anything?
They will need to clear some hedgerows and some small trees to get the access points in off Cutbush Lane itself, but they are compensating for that with planting inside and off-site. There's a landscape buffer secured at the rear of the site, and also as part of the biodiversity net gain project, they will be looking to do further planting to secure their 10% they put forward.
Okay. All right. Thank you, Malcolm.
Sorry. So the trees then, and you're cutting down, you're planting, but elsewhere. But in 5 years' time, when this temporary thing will have to be knocked down, apparently, it's restoring it to its original. That sounds quite a tricky job because, it's got great big studios and metal things and tons of digging up there. It's going to be quite a big, expensive job to go back. The question is, whatever trees you have taken away, if you're restoring it to its original condition, does that include putting trees back where there were trees that you've cut down?
You would look for hedgerow sort of planting along the access points to have that continuation along there. So that would be agreed as part of condition 2, which asks for a remediation plan. So we would be looking at those details later on down the line. So we've got the clawback there to seek to secure additional planting. The planting off-site we would seek to secure as best we could as well, because that's been secured for the Section 106 agreement.
Malcolm, did you have any further questions?
Okay. Well, this commentary, I think is quite an appealing application because, of course, it's modern, it's today's growth industry, it's high employment, it's good for the economy, both local and nationally. All in all, I think it has a lot of pluses, and I'm minded at the moment to be in favour of it. And you've answered most of the questions. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Callum, do we have other members indicating they wish to speak?
We do, Chairman. Give me one moment. We have Gary Cowan and then finally Carl Duran.
Okay, fine, thank you. Good evening, Gary.
Oh, good evening, Simon. Well, I'd like to make one point at the start. In terms of it being a plan for 5 years, we all know that once the principle has been established, if they wanted to extend it beyond 5 years, they would ask to extend it beyond 5 years. The officer would say the principle has been agreed, end of story, and that's the reality of the situation. And Chris Bowring made some very good points on it being the countryside, and we shouldn't miss that point. I was very impressed with the comments made by the two ward members. They were also of interest. But one thing I want to clear, did I get it right when the case officer say at the beginning that there was a change in the conditions to allow access on Cutbush Lane? I'd like to have an answer to that first, please.
So who's going to take that?
It's just to say the permanent access is going in on Cutbush Lane. It was originally from Old House Farm, but they've amended the scheme to put a permanent access in on Cutbush Lane. As I say, permanent as in the permanent access solution. That's there for 5 years and will have to be taken away if the site is decamped after 5 years.
Thank you. No, the point I'm making, if you go on to page 36 and paragraph 56, it says, as advised, access to the site will be from the Eastern Relief Road via the Science Park roundabout, and that is the perfect solution. And then it goes on to say, this eliminates any need for the use of Cutbush Lane for the rest of the new link road for both construction and post-occupation. And I think that's completely and utterly a bad move. I would rather the original conditions on 56 remained. One of the reasons for saying that is living in Arborfield, I drive past the Arborfield studios quite regularly, and vehicles come out of that at all sorts of the hours because of the extended hours that these people work. When you least expect it, they just pop out on Langley Common Road, and there's been several cases of near misses there. The situation you have with this, if you exit off Cutbush Lane and you're going south towards Arborfield or in that or Farmer, that general direction, if it's late at night, you're coming out onto a dual carriageway which is unlit, and cars will be travelling at quite high speed on that road. What you're doing is you're creating a very, very dangerous junction, exiting onto the relief road. And I would actually suggest that, I'd actually even propose it, that we retain the site access via 56 and do not allow access to come through Cutbush Lane. Overall, recognising the fact it is in the countryside, I'm reasonably comfortable with it, but I will not support it if the access is through Cutbush Lane. Thank you.
Do you want me to come back on that? I think maybe there's a little bit of
or Judy, please.
Yeah, so the access to the site will not be along Cutbush Lane and then directly out onto the Eastern Relief Road, because the British Museum site next door has already secured a sort of a build out that will prevent through traffic taking that route. So all the traffic to and from this site will be through the new link road through the Science Park and out onto the new roundabout onto the Eastern Relief Road, if that helps.
It doesn't. What the case officer said was not that. If that's the case, if there can be a clear understanding, that's what's written in paragraph 56 will be the actual access to and from that site, then I'm comfortable with it. If it's not going to be that, well, then I'm not.
Yeah, absolutely. I think where the confusions probably come in is that when the road goes through the Thames Valley Science Park, it comes down to Cutbush Lane. Then they basically come straight off Cutbush Lane at that point. But there's going to be no opportunity for them to actually use the whole length of Cutbush Lane to come out onto the Eastern Relief Road, because it physically won't be possible when the museum works are completed in the next month or so.
Once that's understood, I'm comfortable with it. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. If I could now come on to Carl Duran. Good evening, Carl.
Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Wow, it's amazing. I must be an engineer. Managed to get it working. Okay. Let's get some video on as well. There we go. Okay. Yeah, most of the questions I had have been answered, but a few haven't. I know this site really well because this Cutbush Lane's been on my running routes for about 20 years. And I ran there yesterday. And it used to have a really rural feel, but obviously over the years that's reduced as different things have gone in, including the Eastern Relief Road. I think the temporary permission for this is a bit confusing. I think it's been a messy way of dealing with the problem of this being development in the countryside, and it's temporary, but it's not temporary. But that's what's before us, so it is temporary, and that's what we've got to look at. So I've got three questions really. The first one is, I thought Gary was about to wipe this one off for me, but in what way will Cutbush Lane be closed? And I asked that in terms of access for cyclists and walkers. Will that be maintained from the Eastern Relief Road and the other side of Cutbush Lane, just to see what is happening there, obviously accepting that vehicular traffic won't be allowed. My other question is, the legal agreement was on page 6, which I think was amended by the members' update, but was basically around the idea of the applicant not applying for planning permission before there's further modelling. I could do with a little bit of explanation around that, and I'm wondering also whether that terminology could be strengthened. And the reason behind that is I don't want the same thing happening as happened on a site very close by to this with a similar applicant, which had a similar "thou shalt not apply" clause, which was got rid of by an invitation from this council for them to apply. And I'd hate that to happen again if we didn't want it to happen. So I guess I'm asking, is there anything can be done to strengthen that, or am I going to have to settle for the looking back in 3 or 4 years' time to this night and say, I remember when I said that? And my third question is, I was in the RAF for 10 years, as well. 2 of the colleagues on the committee were also in the RAF, and I went to a lot of secret places and important places, very secure. I never went to anywhere that had a 3-metre boundary fence. So I'm just wondering why the boundary fence is 3 metres. It doesn't seem to be needed for security. So if somebody could explain that, would be great.
Okay, so first we've got the issue about the Cutbush Lane and whether pedestrian and cycling access would be maintained. Then we've got Carl's concerns about the fact this is a 5-year application or a temporary application, and finally your last point. So who's going to take these? Which is I've got
a photo. Okay. If I could share a photo, it might help just to understand it a little bit more in terms of what we're doing to Cutbush Lane or what has been already agreed. Judy, I don't know if Judy can jump in with me, but basically what you can see in the background here is a Science Park link road to the side, which pings off to the right-hand side of the photograph here, and that's what we've been referring to as a Science Park link road. It comes onto Cutbush Lane short for a very short stretch, which has been upgraded, as you can see, by the British Museum. Ultimately, Cutbush Lane will be stopped up, if it's the right terminology, for through vehicles at the point where I'm pointing to with my mouse, or trying to point to, if you can see that, if that's coming across. So there will be no through vehicle movements for that. So you won't be able to pop out of Cutbush Lane onto the Eastern Relief Road that way. You'll have to go up to Science Park and go to the Science Park roundabout. So I hope that clarifies in terms of that element of the scheme.
Yeah, I was just going to say, is that a physical barrier, or are we just talking about no entry signs effectively?
So it's a curbed build out on the southern side of the road, and then a bollard. So it still allows the pedestrian cycle activity through. So it's basically got cycle markings and tactile paving and all that sort of stuff to have this sort of continuous, seamless pedestrian cycle route through. The reason it's got the bollards is because the emergency vehicles can still get down there, but all other traffic would be stopped and needing to go through the science park.
Okay, great stuff. Cheers.
So does that address your concern, Carl?
Yeah, that's spot on.
Okay, thank you. And the issue regarding the fact it's a five-year temporary permission, coupled with the point that was made by Gary Cowan about concern about a renewal of a 5-year temporary permission. A simple way of resolving this is that we could actually add a condition that says that there can be no extension of this 5-year permission should we grant it tonight without it returning to planning committee for consideration.
Sorry, Simon. It will have to come back to planning committee because it will be a major scheme. Yeah.
Yeah. So we've got belt and braces there. So hopefully, Carl and Gary, that gives you some reassurance. And then I think Carl's last point related to why does the security fencing need to be 3 meters high?
I think that's for the operational aspects of the studio space. I think it's quite standard for the industry. Obviously, people try and get in. It's in this day and age, unfortunately, there's a bit of people trying to sort of make a nuisance of themselves, trying to see any stars or anything else like that. So I think that's what they feel comfortable with. It's a sort of a mesh fence, so it's not completely blocked off. So it has less of an impact in terms of what an ordinary fence, closed border fence may well have. So we think that's acceptable. The landscape officer assessed that element as well, and she finds that acceptable. So,
okay, all right, okay. Members, we've spent an hour and 20 minutes on this application so far. I can see, unless it's people who've forgotten to take their hand down, I've still got some members wanting to come around the second time. Gary Cowan?
Sorry, I've lowered my hand.
Thank you. Chris Bowering?
It's just a general question. When an application has come to the planning committee and have been approved for a temporary period, is it correct that it then must automatically come back again for an extension? Even, for example, if it was only for the planning committee because it's been listed by a local member, is that correct?
Well, we've just heard from Chris, Howard, that the reason this would have to come back is because it's a major application anyway. It would automatically have to be determined by the planning committee.
Yeah,
because of the scale.
Speaking slightly off the applications was a general point, whether it was true that it always had to come back. If it'd been here once, then it must come back again if it's approved for a temporary period.
Is any of the officers present able to clarify that point?
Yeah, it would. It basically, so after the 5-year period, we can't, as officers, we can't just delegate a decision saying you can extend by another 5 years, because in essence, it's a new application after 5 years. So it would have to come back. We couldn't make a decision just to extend it.
Okay, thank you. Thank you.
Okay, so Abdul, did you wish to come back? No, your hand was up.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Just before I vote, I'm minded to support this application. However, the applicant is Shinfield Studio, not Reading University. I'm going back to Section 106 security, aspect of it. So so it's nothing to do with Reading University then.
Well, could
clarification, please
clarify that in view of your earlier comments about ultimate responsibility for the land. Should there be issues that meant that Shinfield Studios was no longer on site or operational?
Yes, the university will remain owning the land. Shinfield Studios are the leaseholders from them. So basically, the university are the party to the Section 106 agreement as well. So they will be jointly working on this and have been jointly working on it.
So it is a renewable lease here?
Yes, yeah. Shinfield Studios have signed a lease, but the university tend to, their model is to retain the land.
Okay. All right.
Thank you, Chair.
Thank you very much. So, members, as I say, we've had a pretty thorough discussion on this, and I've heard, obviously, we've had a number of very valid points raised. I hope that I think you'll agree that we have had answers to all of those from the officers present. So, firstly, I need to ask whether any members of the committee wish to put forward an alternative proposal to that is before us, which is to recommend approval. Does anybody wish to put forward an alternative proposal? I see no one indicating. In that case, members, as I say, we've had a thorough discussion and debate on this. We had a lot of questions answered. So I would ask whether you could please indicate your support for this application by raising your electronic hand. This is application 210387.
Assuming you're voting for it, Simon, that will be unanimous.
Sorry, so if I put my own hand up into it, yes. So I think that's everybody voting.
Correct. That's unanimous, Chairman.
Okay, so there's no need to take alternative votes. So I can confirm the planning application 210387, temporary permission for the film studios, as detailed in the paperwork we've received tonight and the members' update, is thereby approved. Thank you, members. Okay, if you could all take your hands down, please. Struggling to do so myself. There we go. Right, so we now come on to the second application tonight, which is an application in Sonning. This is application 201833, and it's for the proposal to build a number of apartments in Old Bath Road. And I think we've got Andrew Chugg as the planning officer to take us through this application. And I'd move straight to Andrew.
Thank you, Chair. I will just share my screen.
Yeah, we can see that.
See that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so this is application 201833. This is an outline application for 56 private dwellings suitable for older persons accommodation. Access, scale and layout of a determination here, with reserved matters of landscaping and appearance, both deferred for consideration at a later date. The site is located in settlement within the limited development location of Sonning, and it is positioned between the Old Bath Road to the north and Sonning Golf Club's driving range to the south. The southern boundary of the site here represents the edge of the countryside designation to the south. The proposed units will be delivered in three-story blocks following the demolition of the lawns, the range and Red Lodge. There is an extant planning permission 200354 in place for redevelopment of this application site for 7 detached large dwellings as background. This extract from the site block plan is also provided at figure 2 on page 111 of your agenda, and it shows the relationship of the proposed blocks with the neighbouring properties, and also shows the existing dwellings proposed to be demolished in red here, here and here. Proposal would sit in the context of the detached properties to the southwest and of course 3-story nursing home Sunrise to the northeast. This is a very significant and over-dominating 3-story building. It has an approximate width of 57 metres and a depth of 66 metres, and it would be significantly larger than either of the blocks that are proposed under this application. Hence, the Sunrise building really provides context for certainly the replacement of larger buildings on the application site. In terms of notable planning history on adjacent sites, there is an extant planning permission 161529 for 13 houses at Sonning Golf Course that was allowed at appeal. The reserve matters for this, I believe, have also now been approved, and its location is relative to the application site is shown here to the southwest. The permission relates to development falling wholly within the countryside, and if this is implemented, the proposal would be viewed in the context of this infill housing scheme. The application site is shown here via Google Earth image taken from the south above Sonning Golf Club. The image shows the significant bulk and mass of the neighbouring Sunrise building and the other residential dwellings to the southwest. A While a significant number of trees are proposed to be removed from the application site, no category A or B trees would be felled. The majority of the vegetation and trees for removal will be taken from the middle of the site, and there is further scope for additional tree planting along the boundaries to soften and screen the development, especially to protect the views from locations from within the countryside to the south. The council's trees and landscapes officer has raised no objection to the application following assessment of the submitted landscape visual impact assessment that was put in. Local plan policy CCO2 requires proposals at the edge of settlements to demonstrate how they respect the transition between the built-up area and the open countryside by taking account of the character of the adjacent countryside and landscape. In this instance, proposed block C, shown here, will be sited 20 metres from the rear boundary, with block B being located between 6 and 20 metres away from the rear boundary. In addition, the densest tree cover on this site would be located in the southeastern corner, thereby giving block B the most screening when viewed from the south. Hence, the proposal provides a sufficient spatial buffer to protect the transitions between the countryside and the suburban area, especially when considering the context of the existing built form provided by the neighbouring Sunrise building. This Google image shows the front or north elevation of the application site, the lawns as it is currently occupied here, also in the context of the Sunrise building, obviously here, familiar in terms of its massing and bulk, and also Redgrave, which is the adjacent neighbouring property here. As outlined in my report, the proposed block A would provide a suitable transition in terms of the height and massing between these two buildings. The relationship is shown in more detail in this cross-section street scene drawing that was submitted by the applicant here. In respect of parking, the applicant has submitted a car ownership survey from other similar developments in suburban areas, and the proposed parking spaces reflect these lower levels that are required. The proposal intends a total of 63 parking spaces, including 10 disabled, that would serve the whole development. 45 spaces with a maximum of 1 per flat would be provided for the residents, whilst the remaining spaces be left for staff and visitors. There'll be no overnight staff staying at the site. This level of parking has been considered to be acceptable to serve the development. Mobility scooter storage would be provided in both block A with 10 spaces and within block B with 9 spaces, 18 spaces overall. Evidence of other similar schemes have also been provided in respect of cycle ownership and use, and the proposed 12 cycle spaces, while it's lower than expected for normal flats, this level of cycle parking is considered acceptable in this instance, given the age restriction on occupation that we're proposing to impose. The proposal would retain suitable separation distances between other dwellings to protect the amenities of both existing and proposed residents, as outlined in my report, and adequate communal amenity space plus private balconies in many cases is also proposed for future occupants. Proposal would provide policy compliant financial contributions in lieu of affordable housing and an employment skills plan. Section 106 clauses will also secure a travel plan to protect more sustainable modes of transport to and from the site, and also a clause to limit the occupation of the development to the over 60s. No adverse issues have been raised in respect of ecology, environmental health, archaeology or surface water drainage, and conditions are recommended to deal with those points where appropriate. There are 2 points to note in your update sheet. Firstly, condition 16 for electric vehicle charging, that should actually be a pre-commencement condition. And secondly, the affordable housing contribution figure has been amended to correctly reflect the net gain of units that would occur on the site. Hence, the contribution in lieu would equate to 21.6 units with a contribution of 1,605,236. The application is therefore recommended for approval subject to those changes in the update sheet.
Okay, thank you, Andrew. If we could lose your presentation.
Yeah.
Right, thank you very much. So we have a number of people registered to speak against and one for. So firstly, if I could come to Trevor Fishers, who's from Sonning Parish Council. Good evening.
Good evening, Chairman, and also to members of the committee. The members of the Sonning Parish Council were shocked, really, to hear that the council officers had recommended approval of this planning application. We didn't expect that at all. Sonning, as you know, is designated a limited development location, and in particular this part of Sonning, south of the A4, typically consists of detached houses with largish gardens. This proposal is totally out of character with its surroundings and represents an extreme overdevelopment of the site. You may remember Linkside. It's a recent similar proposal, which is just the other side of the two fairways on the Sonning Golf Course. The WBC planners recommended rejection of that because of the density of 32 dwellings per hectare was regarded as too high. This proposal is over 48 dwellings per hectare, over 50% greater than that. So where's the consistency? We're not seeing any consistency here. This development will also add almost 10% to the number of households in Sonning. We're a very small community. Many of the occupants of these 57 flats will be fit 55 to 80 or 90-year-olds. Not all will have cars. To leave this area as a pedestrian is very hazardous indeed. I speak from experience. There is no path to the east. To walk elsewhere requires crossing the busy A4 with a 50-mile-an-hour speed limit or crossing Pound Lane, both locations of which are close to the A4 Pound Lane roundabout. The parish council frequently receives reports of speeding vehicles at both crossing points and has downloaded evidence using its speed indicating device. To walk to Woodley requires crossing a railway bridge with no pedestrian pathway. This hazard was also mentioned by the planning inspector in his dismissal of the appeal for the aforementioned Linkside. The suggested signalised pedestrian crossing for the A4 is unlikely to be installed. The Sonning Parish Council has campaigned tirelessly for many years for a similar signalised crossing in Pound Lane to very little effect. The village of Sonning is renowned for its traffic problems, as you know. It is further under threat by the proposed large development in Emma Green, and also the Reading Bluecoat School has also applied to increase its pupil numbers by 40%. If this scheme was allowed, many extra vehicles would then be expected to travel over Sonning Bridge, and this would be exacerbated by the extra cars, delivery vans, etc. associated with this development. Light pollution is also a common complaint from our residents. This will obviously be a lot worse should these flats be allowed to be built. Also, Sonning is in the process of producing its neighbourhood development plan. The initial questionnaire for residents is shortly to be distributed, having been delayed by the COVID pandemic. One question specifically refers to this site on the Old Bath Road and asks if this is suitable for development. Having looked through the comments on the WBC website referring to this application, I have not found one in favour. I am therefore confident that were the parishioners of Sonning to be asked about this development, there would be a resounding no thank you. Could I ask if the committee is minded to agree to this development, to at least consider delaying the decision on the application until the result of this questionnaire is known? And the parish council would very much appreciate not inflicting this undesirable development on the people of Sonning against their will. Thank you very much for listening.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Fisher. If I could ask you to turn your camera off, and if I could now invite Paul Etherington, who is speaking as a local resident. Good evening.
Evening, committee. Yeah, I'd agree with Trevor's comments around the continuing changing character of Sonning and the bulk that these proposed buildings provide. And as the officers just set out, the plan here is to see developments on two sides of our property, with the golf course green space being built on and then potentially this development as well. And it's conspicuous to me that the scheme drawings that you saw earlier on page 134 of your pack show the new homes that were built adjacent to this site were in keeping with Sonning. They were large family homes with decent sized gardens. I sat on planning in Maidenhead for a number of years, so I know what a huge bundle of papers you've had to wade through this evening and how difficult it is to visit all the sites, and that was even before we were dealing with lockdown. So you can't necessarily get a feel for the area. But I think everybody recognises that there are no GPs practices in Sonning, which presumably over 60s would need more than younger folk. There's no dentist, there are no walkable shops or churches, bars, restaurants. And as Trevor was saying, you have to cross the fast dual carriageway even to get to the bus stop. And I can't imagine doing that carrying a load of shopping. So that's going to mean a huge number of extra vehicle movements. A number of these people will still be working age, of course, as Teresa pointed out in her comments. Some of them will actually have 2 cars. So the numbers and the plan don't really work in that respect. And if they're anything like the rest of us who've been working through lockdown, that means a constant stream of Amazon deliveries, supermarket vans arriving. There's also the matter, as has been noted in the paper, of the success of the rugby club at the end of Old Bath Road. We've just built a large new stand, and on match days, the entirety of Old Bath Road, Pound Lane, all of the roads around have got cars parked on the pavement, on the verges. And if one had to get emergency services in, I have no idea how one would do it under those circumstances. The papers also note that the local transport is absolutely rubbish. The buses are hourly at best. They regularly don't turn up. And of course, there are none on Sunday. So again, I'm not sure how people are expected to do their shopping. To me, that points to this 100-bedroom development needing very, very many more traffic movements than is currently considered. And I know highways have got no objections, but of course they had no objections to the golf course scheme. And within a year of the inspector allowing it, there'd been a fatality in the spot of road that the local people knew was dangerous and warned would be the case. It seems I can't actually share any photos with you in terms of the medium this evening, but one thing you can see, if I was able to do so, is that the Old Bath Road on this side is already full of cars by day, whereas the Old Bath Road on the other side of Pound Lane is empty, and that's obviously because of sunrise. So the thought that more cars come into this area just seems completely crazy, and that's not even on a Rams match day or training day. So, and then lastly, I'm not actually convinced there is demand for this. The applicant implies some sort of faux altruism here, that they're providing something that's needed, but the McCarthy and Stone development in Twyford is still not all sold, and that's been there for a couple of years, and that is walking distance from doctors, dentists, churches, supermarket, train station, and loads of buses. So this one, as Trevor said, on the outskirts of the village where there are none of those things, actually makes no sense at all to me. And thank you for having the time to listen.
Okay, sorry, did you conclude there?
Yeah, I was done.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay. Next, could I come to Tim Burden, who is agent for the applicant? Good evening.
Good evening. Chair, members, thank you for the opportunity to address you this evening. I'd firstly like to thank your officers for bringing this proposal to committee with a recommendation for approval, following its robust consideration through the application process. This proposal will meet the needs of a specific sector of the community through the provision of bespoke older persons accommodation on a site located within the settlement boundary. The officers' report before you has considered the merits of the proposal in some detail, so I'll focus on those matters that I know are of concern to members of the public. Firstly, we recognise that this is a somewhat unusual site, not least given the existence of the dominant bulk and mass of the adjoining 3-storey Sunrise care home. This has necessarily influenced our proposals, and we sought to respond positively to it, whilst also reflecting the wider character and appearance of the area. Since the submission of the application, the scheme has been amended. Consequently, there are no outstanding objections from the Council's internal consultees. The Highways Authority is satisfied with the quantum and approach to car parking provision at the site. It's been demonstrated that there is typically a low level of car ownership by residents at retirement schemes, and therefore a low demand for parking spaces compared with normal residential units. A Stage 1 road safety audit has been undertaken of the site access proposals and is also considered acceptable to the Highways Department. As set out in the officer's report, the proposal accords fully with the standards contained within your design guide, demonstrating sufficient back-to-back distances and protecting residential amenity. To further minimise the potential impacts on neighbouring properties, blank gable-end walls have been avoided where possible and site boundaries will be reinforced. The proposal has also been designed to ensure that buildings are set back from the rear boundary allowing for the introduction of robust structural landscaping on the settlement boundary, reinforcing the existing tree belt which will be retained, along with existing mature hedgerows on other boundaries. Indeed, the layout has been configured to ensure that the majority of existing trees and hedgerows will be retained and enhanced as part of the wider landscape strategy. The proposed site access ensures that the trees of high and moderate value are retained, with only 3 low-value trees being proposed for removal. Finally, and importantly, this proposal makes full contributions toward affordable housing and an employment skills plan. In summary, your officers have recommended the proposals for approval. The means of access, layout and scale of the scheme are considered appropriate. This is of course an outline scheme, and detailed design considerations and landscaping will be submitted subsequently. There will be no material harm in terms of privacy and amenity. The proposal will integrate within this transitional site, and all council highways and other standards are met in full. Accordingly, we would ask members to approve the application in accordance with your officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. And finally, could I ask you to turn your camera? Thank you, you beat me to it. Could I finally ask for Councillor Firmager, the Sonning Borough Councillor, I believe you're registered to speak. Michael, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here. Yeah, hello there. Good evening. Good evening, Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. Let me start by saying I'm extremely surprised that officers have recommended conditional approval subject to legal agreement of this planning application. This development is out of character with the area being of 3 stories. This is overbearing, certainly when compared to other 3-storey buildings in Sonning. The other properties in the area are mostly 2-storey. The proposed development will overlook local houses, and as a consequence, there will be loss of privacy, despite what was just been mentioned, especially with the mention of balconies. This is overdevelopment of an already congested area. This is especially so with a side road to the proposed development already providing access to the Rams Rugby Club. This side road will be even more chaotic on match days, especially with the progress that the rugby club is making up the rugby pyramid. The access from this proposed site will be onto the A4, which is an already extremely busy road with speeding traffic, providing links to London and Reading. In addition, there are infrequent bus links, and the site is such a long way from local amenities. How are these additional residents meant to go about accessing local amenities? Could it be by car? And further increasing pressure on local roads rather than walking, which could prove difficult. Interestingly enough, the sustainability report for the Old Bath Road from Property and Energy Services Limited states, and I quote, "There is good road access from the Old Bath Road, which is a spur road off the A4 road," unquote. I do find this comment amazing with the access issues I have mentioned and in the objections lodged by others and what we just heard this evening as well. The parking allocation for 57 flats with 63 as mentioned in the transport statement, or is it 64 as mentioned in the design access statements? Whatever it is, the number of spaces is not enough. This is just assuming there is 1 car per flat. Also, there is not enough spaces for visitors. This will cause parking issues and begs the question, where will the additional cars park on already congested roads? This application indicates the removal of trees and hedgerows in order to construct these buildings. This is going against the climate change emergency declared by Wokingham Borough Council and the recently announced planting of 250,000 trees throughout the borough. This will result in loss of land and natural habitation. This is a threat to biodiversity, which once gone will never ever return. As can be seen by the number of objections, there is a strength of feeling against this development across the village. I urge this committee to vote against this ill thought out and irresponsible planning application. Thank you very much.
Okay, thank you very much. That concludes the registered speakers. If I could just try and get absolute clarity on a couple of points. I understood that firstly this is an outline application, Andrew, but that there is already a existing application on site that's been approved for 7 larger detached dwellings. Can you confirm that, please?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, thank you. The next point I wanted to make is obviously the Sunrise building is a very large building. Would it be fair to say that if the Sunrise building was there, this wouldn't be something that the council would be considering appropriate, and it's the bulk and mass of the Sunrise building that makes something larger than a conventional two-storey dwelling acceptable at this location in the officer's view? Is that correct?
Certainly the Sunrise building provides part of the context of the area. It's undeniable. Yes, there are other more modest residential properties to the west, more traditional properties with a degree of infilling. Plus also you have the golf club application for those 7 units also within the countryside as well. So all of that provides the context, but certainly the Sunrise is, stop short of saying it's a monolithic building, but it's a very, very significant building. That would be,
thank you.
Yeah.
Right, thank you. The other point I just wanted to check was I recall we've considered some similar 3-storey applications in the centre of Wokingham in previous years, and although they were generally restricted to people over 55, or as in this case 60, I distinctly recall that the people proposing those advised us that the average age of people moving to these semi-sheltered sort of accommodation was actually 78. Do we have any information to support whether that is still the case?
I've got nothing specific on that. No, it's that age has been proposed by the applicant. That's their market.
No, I understand that. It's just that if you have an age that is a limit, but the reality is that people who are living there are generally significantly older, that does have implications in terms of traffic and parking. Okay, fine. And lastly, obviously, members, as you've heard from all the speakers, we have specific objections tonight from Sonning Parish Council, Charville Parish Council, the local ward member, and I think 17 or 18 objections, and no support on this one. So we don't have a ward member present, but we'll move straight across to whoever wishes to comment on this. Who have we got, please, Callum?
Just give me one moment, Chairman. I believe the first hand I saw was Andrew Mickleborough, followed by Chris Bowring.
Okay, we'll take those in that order. Andrew, go ahead, please.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Given the position of the very large Sunrise care home that's been mentioned numerous times tonight next to this application, I'm not actually inclined to give much weighting to the objections that have been raised in the documentation regarding the size and the bulk of what's proposed and its impact on the character of the area. However, I do have 3 main concerns and questions about this application. The first is with regards to the affordable housing. Now, there may be valid arguments in favour of a financial contribution in lieu of 40% affordable housing. My own preference would be for at least some, or ideally all of the affordable housing to be provided on site. So I would be very interested, in hearing what the arguments are for not having the affordable housing actually provided on site. Secondly, officers conclude that there wouldn't be any adverse highway impacts. Now, am I right in assuming that this is referring solely to vehicle numbers? Has the analysis also included highway safety? And again, this has been alluded to a number of times tonight already. I know this site very well, and it does concern me that despite no reported accident in the past 5 years, this is very dangerous for cars coming along the A4 from Reading wishing to turn into the site. The age of drivers living in the proposed development must also, I would argue, factor into the consideration. I would assume that as a care home, Sunrise would have a much lower proportion of residents who still drive than those in the independent living proposed, where, given the entry ages, it's quite possible that there could be two people, each with cars and driving. The road safety does concern me. It is acknowledged that this is not a sustainable site. It doesn't seem to me that it could easily become one. It worries me, for instance, that there's a reference to possibility of installing a pedestrian crossing on the A4 to enable bus users to cross safely. Now, I know that vehicles often travel at great speed along this section of the A4. And once again, the age of residents who might wish to use such a crossing to access the bus stops and so forth needs to be factored in. And finally, I think that the concerns that have been raised tonight regarding the impact of this development on local services such as GP surgeries, the lack of nearby shops, the fact that there is not a pedestrian crossing over a pedestrian walkway over the railway bridge, always raises a lot of concerns in my mind. My question is, if this site is not sustainable, and if local services may realistically be deemed unable to cope, are there grounds in planning law for these reasons alone to refuse an application of this type? Thank you.
All right. Right. Thank you, Andrew. So just to confirm the points, is the affordable on site, which is actually a matter I raised with the planning officers on Monday, and I think they understand the reasons for this. So we'll leave them to that. There's the traffic volumes and safety. There's the issue about the drivers using this site being older. As an older driver myself, personally, I think that's something I slightly resent, because I've driven with many 80-year-olds and I'm much more comfortable driving with them than I am with my 23-year-old nephew, but that's another matter. And then also there's the issue about walking on the railway bridge. And finally, the comments made about the overall sustainability of the site in terms of facilities. Obviously, that has got to be offset against the Section 106 contribution of 1.6 million, which is used, of course, to provide and bolster existing services. So, Andrew, would you like to start with those, please?
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, we had a discussion with our housing team, and they actually requested their contribution in lieu rather than on-site provision, because they anticipated that there may be management problems in respect to this particular unit, but also there'd be high service charges associated with this model of development. So in that sense, they've asked for the contribution in lieu. If I could leave maybe the second point on highway stuff to Judy, but in terms of the third point on sustainability, I mean, I think it's accepted it's not the closest to existing shops and services, but it is in settlement. It's an in-settlement location, and trying to argue it's not a sustainable location appeal, I think, would be fruitless. So I think we have to be mindful of that.
Okay, thank you. But Judy, could you address issues about traffic volumes, road safety, and the lack of a footway across the railway bridge, please?
Yeah, so just in terms of the vehicular impact of the site, I mean, as you can see in the report, there's 8 movements in the AM peak and 6 movements in the PM peak, which you would have to offset against the 3 houses that are there already. So effectively, this proposal is increasing vehicular traffic by about 6 movements in the AM peak and 4 in the PM peak. So really fractional compared with the level of traffic on the surrounding network. The infrastructure could definitely be improved in this area. I'm not going to deny it, but again, it's the proportionality of this site being in settlement, and the fact that if there are upgrades needed to the network around that, it's not necessarily for this one site to cause those. There is, as was mentioned, a restriction in terms of getting over the railway line on down to Butts Hill Road, I think was the was the location of Pine Lane. I mean, rather than taking that route, you could take the Duffield Road route, which does have a segregated footway across the railway line. So yeah, I'm not going to deny that there are, restrictions in terms of, the quality of pedestrian crossings and footways and so in the area. That's something the existing residents sort of deal with day to day. I think the other thing to mention as well is that there is an obligation for the site to develop a travel plan. So they will be looking at promoting sustainable modes of transport to the residents, and also clearly bringing up any shortfalls in terms of infrastructure in the area. I'm sure we will be hearing from them in future in terms of improvements that might need to be made there. But again, it's proportionality in terms of the MPPF. We can only be refusing applications in highways terms if the cumulative impact of them is severe, and given the the in-settlement and the inspector's decision on the Sonning Golf Club site and the care home next door, just a refusal reason in highways terms wouldn't be sustainable.
Okay, Judy, I was a little surprised that you compared the peak hours with the 3 existing dwellings as opposed to the extant permission on site. Could you just clarify that? Because that would be for a greater number of dwellings, and therefore the differential would presumably be different.
Yes, quite right, actually. So the increase is even smaller, really, compared with the extant consent on the site, which I think was for, I can't remember whether it was for 5 or 7 dwellings. Andrew can probably.
I think it's 6 plus the existing ones, isn't it? It's 6, which is replacing 2, so it's a net gain of 4. I think, is that correct, Andrew?
Yes, that's correct.
So six dwellings. Yeah, so in that case, we're really looking at an increase in 4 trips in the AM peak and 2 trips in the PM peak. Bearing in mind the nature of the retirement use of the site and the fact that that is restricted by the Section 106 agreement that is intended.
Okay, thank you. Sorry, who was next, please, Callum?
Let me bring the list up.
I think it was Abdul. I think, was it?
I think it was me.
I believe it was Chris first. Yes.
Okay. Chris first, please. Go ahead, Chris.
Thank you very much. I'll just start with the comment from the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Service, which said the proposal would impose an additional burden on the fire authority's existing infrastructure, which I thought was a bit opaque. I wasn't quite sure what they were asking for. Was that they prompting for a refusal or an amendment, or what?
I would have assumed any additional buildings would fit that description of imposing additional burden on the infrastructure.
But it's self-evident, isn't it? But was there any other meaning to the comment? Have officers taken that on board?
Andrew, any views on that?
No, I'm afraid it's as you read it, really. But yeah, of course, any new development is going to have that kind of impact.
But they don't write that into every single planning application they're asked to comment on. It would be rather tedious.
Yeah. I mean, on that point, the applicant has kind of considered the provision of sprinkler system within the building. It's not something we could secure under planning because it's a building regulations issue. But I'm led to believe that they are considering using sprinklers within these buildings.
Okay, thank you. On page 109, paragraph 4. It refers to the employment skills plan whilst talking about affordable housing. I don't really understand what that's got to do with it. And are we approving an employment skills plan? Why has that come up here?
No, we're not approving one as such. There's one of 2 options really with employment skills and how we deal with this. Either an applicant can submit one, which we will consider and approve. It will have targets in there for getting improvements in terms of skills in as part of the development, or conversely, the applicant can play a contribution for us to do that. So in this instance, they've chose to pay the contribution for us to produce that, and then they will be required to kind of meet those criteria within the skills plan. So whatever that could include a number of different criteria, basically.
So perhaps that's normally put in the Section 106 and we don't see it. Is that right? Because I don't.
It would normally, I would say it would normally be on a recommendation, but yeah, would go in as a heads of terms on the section 106. Yeah, but
are we approving the section? Sorry.
Yeah, it would be normally section 106, and it would normally be an either-or scenario. So either they can produce a plan and we'll make sure they implement it, or they can pay us to produce the plan and then it gets implemented. In this instance, it's the latter.
Okay. And are we actually approving section 106 here at the outline stage?
Yes, absolutely. Section 106 has to be approved at outline stage. Yeah.
Thank you. No, it's there's a degree of confusion over whether this is to be regarded as a care home, and it's been put forward as a C3. And on page 112, it refers to, or you referred to the core strategy, saying that older people delivering more choices in the housing and care available to them is a plus. And that is true here because they've restricted the ages. So that's good. But then on the next page, I think you actually draw attention to the confusion that the applicants also referring to enhanced sheltered schemes, which there certainly isn't. So can I take it that the first comment about giving greater choice to older people, and I don't regard myself as old, but I seem to be old now, according to this, but that choice is to be taken into account through the age restriction, and that is a plus for the application.
Yes, to a degree. I think that section of the report, I wanted to make clear that there was no real significant additional weight being given to this because it is over 60. It does provide a little bit of extra variety in terms of type of housing. However, there is no care need associated with this. We don't consider that this meets a care need as such. So really, in terms of weight, it's okay. It's delivering close to 60 units, which is good. That has merit. But over and above that, there's not much more weight on that. So I just wanted to be clear that from the outset, basically, in the report.
But it is giving it's giving more choice to older people, is it not? Because of the condition. Yes. It's a condition on this if we approve it. But it has to be over 60. So yeah, so that is a plus. Okay, brilliant. Okay, I turn to page 114. You have a very useful diagram showing the sunrise. Is it sunrise on the left, and the proposal in the middle, and I think it's the red grave on the right. What are the and also there's a reference to dwellings in Duffield Road and Pound Lane that the applicant has drawn our attention to. It seems to me clearly that the height of the two adjacent buildings, the Sunrise and the Red Grave building, are important matters. What actually are the heights of those buildings compared with the proposal?
I don't have that off to hand, but I think it's clear from the information that's provided that the Sunrise building is certainly larger than or higher than what is proposed. Yes, and obviously the neighbouring residential property would be slightly lower than the plot A or block A that's proposed. But,
you didn't have a photograph of the two, did you, on the road together?
Yes, there's the cross section. There's the cross-sectional drawing, which I showed in my presentation, and is also in my report as well, which shows context. Sorry, figure 2, I think it was.
Figure 3? Figure 3?
Yes, figure 3. Figure 3 on page 114.
Yeah, that's what I was referring to.
Yeah. So clearly, there is block A would be much larger than Redgrave. That's obvious. But also, it is a case of transition between the two buildings.
Yeah, and what about the one in? Because the applicant was, I think, quoting this in its support, the Sonning Golf Club building, 13 dwellings, suggesting that they were high as well, which we might consider to be part of the surrounding area in terms of this application fitting in visually.
I think the application on the Sonning Golf Club, whilst it is relevant, I think it more underlines that obviously there's an encroachment in the countryside there. That obviously that scheme was allowed at appeal. The kind of general bulk and massing of those units would be more reflective of the more residential scale, independent, separate residential developments in the area rather than the proposal. But I think it is relevant in the sense that there is that encroachment in the countryside. So again, it's context. It shows that something's coming out of that into the countryside, whereas the Sunrise building is about its bulk and mass more so.
Okay, thank you. I just got a question on parking. With regard to there's 63 car parking spaces proposed, including 10 disabled. Well, that rather reduces the number, doesn't it? Because if you're not disabled, then I guess most of the people, visitors, or certainly visitors and people living there won't be disabled. So that's really 53 for them. And we're calculating 1.11 per unit with regard to the 63. If we take it as 53, then it's closer to the parking rate, but I guess it still complies. Is that correct? Perhaps Judy can answer that.
Yeah. So I mean, clearly, the site will be under, the control of one entity that can, have some control over those disabled bays and who uses them and so on. In terms of the parking requirements for a retirement flat use, it's somewhere like 46 to 48 spaces required. And then according to our own parking standards, if we treated these just as normal C3 flats, they would need sort of a minimum of 52 spaces. What they are proposing is 63 spaces, so clearly they have some additional capacity over what would normally be required for retirement flats, or indeed if they were just normal flats, market flats with unallocated parking.
Are you suggesting that the disabled flats could be converted if they really wanted to? That's not a. Is that a planning condition were we to approve?
I think it's just the sort of thing in principle where, depending on who's moving into a flat and who might need a disabled parking bay, it's the sort of thing that could be managed on site, through a sort of an on-site strategy. Like I say, there's more spaces than they need, so it shouldn't be a problem. Okay,
and the cycling, you've taken into account that it's policy of the council to encourage cycling. We're putting greenways in and cycle routes on some of our roads, maybe not local to this application, but there's likely to be an increase in cycling and hence the number of cycles which people own. Is that taken into account when determining the adequacy of the provision for cycling places?
So in terms of cycle parking, I think they're proposing 12 cycle parking spaces on the site, but that's the sort of thing that could be kept under review through the travel plan. If there's more demand for cycling, they could put more in on the site.
Okay, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Thank you, Chris. I think it's just worth clarifying the point that Judy was making there, that there might be 10 designated disabled parking spaces, but since this site will be operated by a site management company, if it transpires that there are only 3 residents who require a disabled parking space, it doesn't mean the other 7 remain empty, because it's up to them how they manage the parking spaces. It's up to us to provide a particular standard, but if they're not actually required by the residents, it would be foolish if those spaces remain empty. But as we've heard, not only does the proposal here exceed the number of parking spaces for this type of accommodation, it also exceeds the number of parking spaces if this was conventional market apartments with no age restriction. So I think there's quite a buffer there in terms of parking.
Yeah, thank you for that, Simon. That clarifies it nicely.
All right, thank you. I think it was Abdul next, I think.
Thank you, Chairman. My question referred to page 113, 113, paragraph 16 and paragraph 19. I think 19 has partly been answered. However, paragraph 16, I'd like Andy to comment on policy TB06 states that the council will resist inappropriate development of residential garden where they would cause harm to the local area. That's one. And the second question was about the maximum dimension of each block outlined in table 1.0 below, which is 13.5. Is there any specific policies which state that in countryside similar like Sonning would have that sort of amount of height, or what would be the policy in town center if this was developed in town center? And I do understand there's 7 large detached buildings beside this development. What was their height? I think that's been asked. Andrew, if you can please give us some details on that. Thank you.
Okay. Andrew, just before you answer, of course, we should just also remind members that this has got to be in the context of the already existing, the height of the immediately adjacent Sunrise building.
Okay.
Andrew?
Yes, thank you. In terms of policy TB06, yeah, TB06 sets a higher bar basically in design standards for redevelopment of residential land, which obviously this is. But very much, we've also do have to consider context. And we've said it before about this, but clearly the Sunrise building does provide context for one part of the one side of the site. So in context terms, it's difficult to argue that this would be out of character as such. It would be hard to make that case. So in this instance, the recommendation is that this complies with TB06. In terms of heights of building, I don't have the specific heights of what was approved on the site already, but they were large detached dwellings. They wouldn't be the same, they wouldn't be as high as what's proposed here now. They would be more reflective of the other residential development to the southwest. But again, it does, any assessment like this does come back to context. What is the context? Again, we keep referring back to the Sunrise building. The height and bulk and mass that Sunrise building is hard to kind of get away from. That said, I think whilst the blocks are large that's proposed, they do have sufficient spacing between them. That they're broken up. Although we're not looking at elevational detail at this moment, that is a reserved matter. The illustrational elevations that they provided are very well broken up in terms of having gables and different materials to kind of break up that massing. Also, the landscaping again. A lot of the landscaping is lost from the centre of the site, and the sides and the boundaries they can be enhanced as well. So yeah.
Okay. Andrew, could you just confirm, Andrew, that since this is outlined, the final determination of height would go along with scale and the other matters to be reserved at the reserved matters stage?
No, height would be dealt with at this stage.
Okay, so height is, so if we were to agree this tonight, those heights are fixed. There's not an opportunity.
So
okay.
Yes, the outline. Sorry, the outline plan that's shown indicates the limit of the height of the building. It obviously doesn't show any detail because the appearance will be reserved.
Yep. Okay. Fine. Thank you. Abdul, does that answer your question?
Thank you. Yes, Chairman. Thank you.
Thank you. Callum, who else do we have wishing to speak on this?
Next, I have Carl, and then following Carl, it's Gary, and then Angus.
Okay. Thank you very much. Carl, over to you.
Thanks, Chair. Okay. The affordable housing here is set at 40%, and that's quite welcome. I prefer to see actual affordable homes built. I think we all would, rather than a commuted sum. There's a lot of younger people need affordable housing, but older people need it too. I think due to planning and housing reforms, that money may end up getting used for deposits or other sales rather than affordable housing. But anyway, I think this development, it's a significant increase in scale and massing to what's already there. But I don't agree with those that have complained about that and said it's out of place, because the main reason for that is, as has already been said, the Sunrise nursing home, a huge dominant building. It's very difficult to argue in planning terms against against this development on the basis of that huge building being there. So really, anyone complaining about the overdevelopment of this site has to complain about why that building got built in the first place, which I know nothing about. However, I kind of do agree that there's not enough parking, despite what's been said. And there's definitely a severe lack of local amenities and very poor bus links. So, and that's a good reason why the parking should be much better. I think a lot of these people will need cars just to do anything. Mr. Fisher mentioned the pedestrian access over the railway bridge into Woodley. I have personal experience of that bridge. That's another running route. I've got a full house of those tonight, and that is a really dangerous spot. So I really don't think this is a sustainable location. Having said that, I do have one question. While landscaping is something that's a reserved matter, and I'm uncomfortable with an application like this, which talks of trees being removed. It refers to 66% of them, although some are just bushes apparently. But there's no indication of what might replace them, because that's what this application is going to deal with. So I just want to ask the question, will this be coming back to us for reserved matters? I assume so, but we know how assumption is often referred to.
Andrew?
In terms of delegation, I'm not sure whether maybe Connor could answer that, actually. I'm not sure whether officers would have delegated approval for reserved matters.
This is a major, so surely it would come back to planning committee, Connor.
Yeah, if it's a major, it should come back to planning committee. I mean,
Okay.
basically what we can do is if there's a positive recommendation on here, we can put a recommendation that it has to come back to planning committee anyway as part of this decision.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, thank you. Gary Cowan, good evening.
Well, thank you, Simon. In Wokingham, we had not far from the council offices, we had a similar situation where we granted planning permission for some residential homes with specific ages on it, and part of the scheme was to reduce the car parking requirements. The bottom line was that they couldn't get sufficient people within the age band to go into it, so they then came back to the council to change the age group so other people could use it, but then that threw in the parking standards, and the building didn't quite meet the parking standards for a different age band of people. And if I just picked on 1.5 parking spaces per dwelling, and this is 56 dwellings, if it was normal occupancy at 1.5, it would be 84 parking spaces, which would give a deficiency of 21. So I can't quite see where the highways people are saying that if it was a normal block of flats, then the 56 parking spaces would be adequate. So that's one point I'd like an answer on. Carl and Andrew both made points about having on-site affordable accommodation, and I would support that. I mean, the officer point was the developer offered money in lieu of that, but I think we as a committee could be in a position to condition it that the affordable housing should be on site and not provided through a contribution. Chris made a point about, on paragraph 93, about the Royal Berkshire Fire and Rescue Commons, but they did go on in the second sentence to say, however, the extent of these impacts would not be a material consideration that would warrant refusal of the application or planning obligation. And then finally, the conclusion was that the proposed is policy compliant and therefore recommended for approval. So with respect to the car parking, it's a bit of an issue for me, and I'd like some sort of an answer there. And I would like to know, would it be acceptable to put a condition on that the affordable housing should be on site and not via a contribution?
Okay, all right. Just taking those in reverse order, Gary, obviously the affordable housing team at WBC has specifically asked that this should be an off-site contribution. So if we were to do that, we'd be going against the recommendation of the officers who obviously look at this matter as professionals rather than us as mere amateurs. So a point perhaps you should give some weight to. Judy, could you just reiterate again the issue about the parking, the proposed parking and its adequacy, not only for the proposed use, but if the use was in fact not what we're discussing tonight, which is just conventional market flats?
Yep. So in terms of our parking standards, you're probably aware that developers have a choice whether they specifically allocate parking spaces to dwellings, and if they do, they can allocate 1 space or 2 space. But the other alternative they have is to make the parking unallocated, so it's a much better use of the site in terms of space, and nobody has got particular priority over 1 parking bay. They all share them, and that way you can get away with reduced numbers. So the requirement for this site, like I said earlier, would be a minimum of 52 parking spaces if it was an unrestricted C2 use class, so just normal flats, sort of market flats or whatever. So they would need 52 spaces unallocated, and obviously if they chose to allocate 1 or 2 spaces per flats, they would need more, but that's not what the proposal is in front of us at the moment. The proposal is for retirement flats, which, as I've already said, the retirement flat car ownership is less than standard market houses or flats. So they're proposing 63 parking spaces. Typical retirement use would need sort of 46 to 48, and if it was a typical just C3 normal housing, it would be 52. So even if they got consent for the retirement flats and then they came in with an application for to vary the Section 106 obligation on the age restriction, and they wanted to go for an application with market housing, there would still be enough parking spaces on this site. We would just need to stipulate that those parking spaces would likely need to be unallocated to hit that kind of minimum 52 spaces that would be required. Does that make sense?
Okay. Yep, it does. Thank you. Now we come to Angus Ross.
Oh, I haven't finished. Can I?
Sorry, Gary. Yeah, go ahead.
We are a quasi-judicial body, and we don't have to necessarily agree with the officers. And you made a point on affordable housing, and I would like to propose an amendment that we recommend that affordable housing is provided on site and not via a contribution.
So that will be contrary to our own officers' requested policy application of affordable housing policy. Is that what you're
but we are a quasi-judicial body, and we are allowed to make a decision or to decide on something not necessarily in agreement with the officers. That's what we're there for, surely.
Totally agree.
If we only do what the officers tell us, we might as well not have a committee.
Okay, thank you, Gary. I would totally agree that we are free to do that, but we should also consider the consequences of that. That if we were to say that we didn't want this, even though our officers are recommending it, it would put us in a very strange position in terms of any subsequent appeal, either against the whole application or against a condition. Just as if we said we decided that it doesn't need the 52 spaces that is determined by our policy, and we decided it should have 80 spaces. If we refused it on that basis, again, it would go to appeal. The planning inspector would say, but this is compliant with your policies. Why are you refusing it? So yes, I accept your point that we can make whatever decisions we want, but they have to be done responsibly. So obviously, if you'd like to put a proposal forward now, we would obviously have to consider that now and see whether somebody's prepared to second it and take a vote. But could I make a suggestion that we hear comments from everybody else before we come to that? Would you accept that?
Yes, that's fine.
Thank you. Right. Okay. So now if I could come on to Angus Ross. Evening, Angus.
Good evening. Thank you, Chairman. Yes, I've got growing unease about this application, but maybe reasons to refuse it are becoming a bit of a challenge. I think I can agree that it's not out of character in terms of what's already there next door with the Sunrise development. Just taking up Gary's point about affordable housing, in general, I don't have an objection to it being off-site, but I think we're in a very odd situation if we decide to have it on-site and then start arguing, as I will be in a minute, that this site is not sustainable. And it just seems to me it is the wrong place to have affordable housing. On the parking, I hear the numbers, and I think, as we have had many, many times in the past, we just don't feel it's enough. But if it's the numbers that are in our policy, we have to go with it. But let us not use the word retirement site for this. There are a lot of people living, still working over the age of 60. It's, I don't know what the exact definition of C3 is, but I think to use the word retirement is misleading. But one point on access, just looking at the plans, is the highways officer satisfied that one, if we have excess parking, that there's nowhere along the access road for it, or is it wide enough for excess parking? But also, in general, is there sufficient turning space for delivery lorries, people moving in and moving out, refuse lorries and the wreck? Because it looks very, very tight to me. I'll give all the points and then come back on them. On overlooking, we were quoted a certain distance, but in our policies, is that distance recognizing that we're talking about a 3-story building? My last and major point and difficulty is with sustainability. Whether we're talking about retired people or people going to work, there is effectively no other way of getting in and out of this place except by car. There are few buses. You can't walk to the shops safely or from distance. And to me, if I had to propose now one reason to refuse this application, it would be on sustainability. Last point I'd make is, can we put in an informative that the committee recommends that sprinklers are fitted? Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Again, as I say, you've made indicated a potential proposal you wish to make there. Perhaps you'd allow us to hear all the rest of the speakers before we come to yours and Gary's potential proposals. Is that acceptable?
Acceptable.
Thank you. Right. Who else do we have wishing to speak, Callum?
Well, could I have an answer on the overlooking point?
My apologies, Angus. So, Judy, would you be able to start looking at the issues about, or I'm not sure it'll be Andrew, about vehicle turning points for refuse vehicles and larger delivery vehicles?
Yeah, happy to answer that. So the site layout has been tracked for the WBC refuse vehicle, which is probably one of the largest refuse vehicles in the country, 11.3 meters. So it can get it right down into the very southern part of the site, and there's a turning head there, and it's all being tracked. In terms of the width of the access road, it's 5.5 meters. So that does allow 2 vehicles to get past each other. Again, as Simon was saying earlier, the whole site is going to be under the control of one entity. So whilst there may be some informal parking along the access road, it would still allow other vehicles to pass. But if it was a problem, clearly they could, take care of that as they would be sort of managing the site.
Okay.
And I think there were a couple of points possibly for you, Andrew, there as well, raised by Angus.
Yes, in terms of overlooking, so in answer to your question, Angus, yes, our borough design guide does break down the back-to-back distances and side-to-back distances and takes account of whether they are ground floor, first floor or second floor. So the criteria in terms of flat to dwellings for back-to-back would be 30 meters. What we have as shown on figure 5 is the closest relationship with 4 Sonning Gate. You have a distance of 31.6 meters. So it complies with our guidance on that. In respect of Redgrave, which is figure 4 shown on your committee agenda, page 117. The back to side arrangement should be 15 metres. What we've got there is 19. Now we appreciate that this is slightly kind of off centre in terms of it's not directly looking on the flank of Redgrave, but through negotiation discussion with the applicant, we've got a condition there to recommend obscure glazed windows in the side as well, even though it does actually meet the side to back distance. And plus you've also got a very thick screen in there in terms of an existing hedge, which must be 4 metres high at that point. Yeah, so that was the back to back distance. In terms of the sustainability aspect, in terms of its location, I think, as we've said before, I think we accept it's not the closest to local shops and what have you, but it's not unusual for new housing to be located the kind of this distance away from shops. At the end of the day, it is within settlement. So in that respect, it would be hard, I think, to argue that it's in an unsustainable location.
Okay, thank you. Callum, who else do we have wishing to speak?
Got Angus. Malcolm is the only one left at the moment, Chairman.
Okay, yeah. Malcolm, go ahead, please.
My comments, in fact, I should have had the same script as Angus in many cases. It's the sustainability. It's not near any shops. It's all very well saying you can walk to the shops, but if you're bringing back lots of shopping, it's not really practical, especially if you're in an older category. It's all very well walking down there for a newspaper and something trivial, but you wouldn't carry several bags of shopping back, which means you have to take your car if you wanted to do shopping, I think. And the age group as well, because it's 55 or 60 over, people are still working at that age for about another 10 years. And I don't know what the employment is like in that exact area, but they would need to go to whatever work they're going to, and that would require driving as well. So I think the sustainability aspect is my main concern there. And if they did have to walk, it doesn't sound like the safest route to take without going 4 miles. Or having to cross dangerous roads. And I don't think the option of having a crossing on what is a fairly busy road as part of that route is practical either. So I have some concerns over the location of this and the type of place it is. I'm not currently in support of it. Thank you.
All right. Okay.
Chairman?
Yes.
Slightly unusual request. Mr. Etherington, one of the speakers, wasn't able to share his screen during his presentation. He's just emailed me 3 photos. Can I quickly just share them on screen just so the committee can see them?
I think Mr. Etherington did take a significant amount of time in his presentation. Just briefly then.
Yeah, it'll be very quick. If I just load them up.
I don't think we've got time for a narrative to go with it.
Right, so if I share that, hopefully you're seeing this. If I just
right,
are you seeing this?
Can you enlarge the screen a bit, please? Yeah, there we are. A line of cars parked.
Yep. So this was lunchtime last week. I'm assuming this is one of the access roads, but I'm not sure. This was the new rugby stand, which he's also said that there's no public transport to get to. And then the third and final picture is this is the turn off from the A4, and he did say that although it's dangerous, although there's no mobility scooter passing at this moment in time. But just wanted to share that, Chairman.
Okay, right, thank you. Thanks. We could just get the screen back.
It should be going up.
Right. Thank you very much. Right, I think we've heard from all the members. So at the moment we have 2 outstanding issues, and I think the one made by one was Gary's initial proposal that he would be considering possibly proposing requiring that affordable housing was provided on site. But also Angus has indicated that he may be inclined to propose a refusal for this application. I assume, Gary, you would agree that we should take Angus's proposal first?
I was going to say, the point you make about we should listen to what the professional officers say, I'll take that point on board. Okay. So I will withdraw the comment I made, but I will mention one point. The conclusion on paragraph 94 says the proposal is policy compliant and is therefore recommended for approval as outlined at the start of this report. So if we're going to take note of the affordable housing and listen to the officers, then I think we have to take note of that sentence as well. Okay,
thank you very much. So Angus Ross, would you like to, you indicated you wanted to make a proposal. Perhaps you could just confirm you haven't heard anything that changes your view and that you would like to make a proposal, and we'll take it from there.
Perhaps safer just to ask for officer comment on that, and especially in relation to we didn't have any plans. We actually showed where the nearest facilities were in terms of a shop of any type. Usually they're in garages now, aren't they? But and what it would take to get from the site to such a place. I didn't have time to do that research.
Okay, Andrew, would you be able to give us some guidance on that, please?
Yes. I mean, I think, as I said before, you know, it's accepted. There isn't too much here in direct vicinity of the application site. I think the M&S is about a mile away. That being the locus that most immediate.
Referring to the one on the A4, yes?
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
Maybe Judy has an idea of other facilities.
Yeah, there's a plan in the transport statement. Actually, I wonder if I could try to share that. Bear with me. It's probably easier to talk around a plan. That's the one, I think. Can you see that?
Yes, we can. Thank you.
Okay, so the site is in red, south of Old Bath Road. The two red circles are the bus stops on the road outside. The orange circle is the nearest shop, which is about 1.1 kilometre up the road. There is a cycleway, a shared pedestrian cycleway that runs down Bath Road. We've got
Sorry, just to be clear, the shop was 1.1 kilometres away, did you say?
That's correct. Yep.
Thank you.
Wee waste.
Say again?
The wee waste.
Yeah, I think it's the one at the Texaco, yeah?
Yeah.
The brown triangles are public houses, petrol filling station and Marks and Spencer's sort of down southwest of the site. There's a few things like, you know, the cricket club, sports club, another cricket club, primary school, golf club. So there's, you know, various facilities, another school, college. So it's really, you know, obviously it's not Wokingham Town Centre. It hasn't got, you know, Waitrose right on your doorstep and so on. But it does have a collection of facilities that are, you know, reasonably close by, although not perhaps the best selection. If you want to do your weekly shop, certainly you're probably likely to go a bit further afield, but there are options in the neighbourhood.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Judy.
Okay.
Could I ask for a comment from Connor then on whether there is any case, considering the infrequency of buses and the distance to walk along a very busy A4?
Yeah, I guess I see the members' concerns and I can understand them, but yeah, I think as Andrew's stated and Judy, that it's actually very difficult for us to find a reason to object to it. I know one of the key statements is not sustainable, but it isn't actually any different than most large-scale housing developments. If you look at shops, they're normally about a mile, a kilometre, 2 kilometres away from shops, so they're actually within distance. There is footpaths and cycleways up. In terms of deliveries, obviously things have changed slightly. There are online deliveries, and I know that was raised before about the number of online deliveries. In terms of the scale, I think it's a real problem to argue against it because of the neighbouring building. So as Andrew pointed out, it's actually within the settlement. So I would struggle to find any reasons to, although I note the points and I do acknowledge that there is problems, but I find any hard to find a reason to refuse it.
Okay, thank you, Connor. So Angus, obviously, and all members, I just remind you that there's nothing in this report that hints at uncertainty about this. I appreciate we've heard a lot of concerns expressed, but in such a report, if there was doubt and uncertainty, we would be seeing phrases like "on balance," the officers can recommend this, but we're not. And I just remind you that the conclusion on page 126 is the proposal is policy compliant and is therefore recommended for approval as outlined at the start of the report. So just to remind members, as Gary has earlier pointed out, we can say whatever we like, but we have to be responsible with it. And at the moment, we're saying we've got a clear recommendation from a variety of professional officers tonight that this is policy compliant. So we would have to find some reason to contradict that they're saying it's policy compliant and come up with that reason to form a substantive reason for refusal. That is my view. But obviously, Angus, if you wish to put this forward and have such a reason, I'm very happy, as of course I'm obliged to put it to the committee for consideration once it's seconded.
Could I comment, please, Simon?
Yes, sure, Chris.
Thank you. I think the problem here with sustainability is that if there have been any other local planning applications, and there's nothing special about this one in terms of age, that it's only people 60 plus, so normal sort of people would live in this application, in these buildings. If there have been any consents given to local planning applications, then that must be taken into account. The sustainability could equally be applied to them, whether it's a semi-detached house or a bungalow or a large thing. The sustainability, the ability to get to the shops is exactly the same. So I think, and I assume there have been other applications probably recently that have been consented. That surely means that sustainability on that basis the lack of sustainability in this application cannot be sustained.
So, Angus, I offer you the opportunity to either substantiate your proposal, in which case we'll see whether it's seconded and supported by the committee, or perhaps you'd indicate whether you wish to do that.
I fear that the case that the officers have made is strong enough. With great reluctance, I will not make that proposal. But if I could just make one comment, that yes, sure. This lack of sustainability to some degree is a good reason to me not to put in affordable housing on that site. Yep. I'll leave that there. And just leaving behind also my proposal of an informative on sprinklers.
Yes, okay, all right. So we've also already heard from Councillor Cowan that he doesn't want to pursue his suggestion of requiring the affordable housing to be on site. So Councillor Ross has proposed a informative, we can't do more than that because this comes under building regs, but an informative encouraging the applicant, if this is to be approved, encouraging the applicant to include sprinklers, and perhaps officers would take note of that. So being that there isn't
Sorry, Chair, it's Abdul here.
Yes, Abdul.
Apologize to just before we go into that voting. This is the first time I come across on page 109, number 3, duly considered as a C3 residential. Duly considered is the first time I come across. I just want to make sure where we are, what's going to be C3. What's the definition of C3 here? Page 109, number 3.
Yes.
Sorry to disturb you.
That's fine. Okay, page 109.3. Yeah. The applicant has advised that the proposal intended to be considered as a wholly C3 residential development offering independent living. There will be ongoing maintenance, cleaning across the development but are not enough to classify this as elements of care. Hence, this outline proposal for access, layout and scale has been duly considered as a C3 residential proposal as discussed below. Okay, maybe I can understand there's some reservations that this could possibly be viewed as a Trojan horse approach, where if we were to approve this, that the applicant may sell the site on or may choose to come forward with a different proposal, having established the outline. So I guess if members would be supportive of that, I would suggest also, Connor, how are we protected against, if this were to be approved tonight, the applicant coming forward with a scheme that does not involve sheltered accommodation such as this?
Well, they'd have to go back to vary the condition to prevent that use. In essence, I think, as Andrew has pointed out in the report, it's clearly been assessed on the basis that even if it wasn't over 60s, it's based on that. So the assessment is made on that, but they would need to come back with a new planning application to remove that condition. Okay. Members are obviously spent quite a bit of time on this, and there's a lot. It is a controversial application. What guarantees would we have that would end up back at the committee rather than something approved by officers? Would we be covered simply by the fact it would be a major application either way? It would be. I'm just trying to think. It'd be a change of condition. They could actually apply for just a variation of that condition. What I'd probably suggest a condition to prevent that. So, yeah, well, what I'd probably suggest is the members recommend in any decision, if there's a variation there, it comes back to planning committee. So you guys have a chance to look at it. Right.
So Chairman, you can add this.
Sorry?
So you can add this condition, yeah?
Yeah, we can add this. So I'll try now and summarise where we are and see whether we can take this to vote. So we don't have an alternative proposal in front of us. Members have got clear reservations about the sustainability of the site, and have perhaps accepted that because this is a form of sheltered accommodation, that it is something that is borderline. To prevent this coming back in an alternative form, we will add a condition that requires any change of conditions relating to this site to come back to the planning committee. Mary and Connor, can you confirm that is acceptable and allowable?
I think I would probably say you need to. So the request would go to officers, so we would have it on the file, as opposed to a condition on saying it has to come back to planning committee. Your request to do that would be noted by officers. So if an application came in, we would take it to yourselves. Okay, thank you. As opposed to a formal condition.
Yes,
okay,
I agree with you there.
Yeah. Okay, thank you both for Connor and Mary's comments on that. In that case, members, subject to the addition.
Sorry, Simon.
Yep.
Is it possible to bring back a new application, which would be, I'm not quite sure about the size here, which would be less than 1 hectare, and then not a major application, and then would go to officer delegation unless it was listed by the local member?
I think any such thing would be most unlikely to happen, considering the high level of opposition to this, and I'm sure that both local residents and Sonning Parish Council would be requiring their local member to list this. So I think we have further protection there. Okay, right, members, once more, I'm going to try and move this on now. We have a clear recommendation in front of us. I know a number of members are uncomfortable about aspects of it, but we have been assured that it is policy compliant. We've got an informative asking that sprinklers should be considered, and we have an assurance that the officers have noted that any material change of condition would also have to be reported back to the planning committee. So on that basis, providing...
Sorry to interrupt again, you didn't vote on the informative, I believe.
Yeah, okay, fine, all right. Firstly, could members please indicate whether they support the informative that we have sprinklers? Could you please do so by raising your hand, please? I would imagine that is probably unanimous. Callum?
Missing one, Chairman. I can't tell who it is.
Okay, all right. Well, we'll. I think it's carried.
Yeah.
But I will ask for anyone. Could you all take your hands down, please? Okay, and if is there anybody who wishes to abstain on the idea of sprinklers? Right, nobody. And is anybody wishing to refuse the idea of sprinklers as an additional informative? Right, fine. So that sprinklers are to be added as an informative. So we now come on to the substantive item, the application that is clearly in front of you. Could you please indicate whether you support the application by raising your hand now? How are we doing there, Callum?
I'm seeing yourself, Malcolm, Chris, Gary, Andrew, and Pauline.
Okay, right. Could you please take your hands down? Sorry, I'm having trouble getting my own hand. Right, thank you. Could members who wish to vote not to support this application, please raise their hand now.
And I'm seeing no hands there, Chairman.
Okay, so not everybody's voted, so we have some abstains. So could members again take your hands down, please? And could members who are wishing to abstain from voting on this item please indicate now? So what do we have in abstentions?
I'm seeing Abdul, Carl, and Angus, Chairman.
Right, okay, that adds up along with the other numbers that you've given us. So therefore I can confirm this planning application, zoning application is approved. Thank you, members. So that concludes the main part of the meeting. And I would just remind members that we do not have planning committee in April, but that we have 2 in May. And there was also an announcement, I think